Club de Madrid, the organization of which I'm chairman now, was created in 2001 when hopes for democracy were global and very high. At that time, the focus was on what was called quality of democracy. We have to improve quality of democracy, meaning better rule of law, a better democratic culture, and all these things. But then we discovered, the organization has discovered that things are going wrong, and in 2014 we defined a new objective, and that objective was democracy that delivers. The delivery aspect of democracy became a big problem, because, you know, democracy is not good only because it's beautiful and everybody likes free elections and such things. Democracy has to deliver better security, better prosperity, improvements of different kinds, and democracies are not delivering, and that is a global problem. Now, how does one know that? Of course, in 2014, people who were experienced in politics already saw that. Now everybody can see that. I mean, you just watch the elections recent elections in France and in Germany, you would see people are dissatisfied with democracy. Democracy has to deliver. And therefore, it would be surprising if at the UN level, at the universal level, it was possible to agree on a meaningful program. Much has to be done before that happens.
Yeah, we'll come back to the point on the recent elections in France and Germany. Before that, Madam President, you know, we think about the SDGs as this core part of multilateralism. What's the intersection between the Sustainable Development Goals and the idea of international justice, your role as the International Criminal Court? Is there any sort of overlap at all? And is that overlap possibly overlooked?
Of course, there is interaction and there is a link between them. I would say that, of course, no society is immune from criminality, and especially societies recovering from violent conflicts. There are many barriers to justice and especially at the local level. Therefore, the international criminal justice is needed. On the other hand, atrocity crimes especially, they prevent the societies from developing. They prevent the individuals and using their rights, and in that respect, I see that there is indeed a link between these goals overall, even if it's a smaller angle. And on the other hand, the criminality is something that arises from societies that are poor, people do not have a vision for the future, and so on. So I think there is a lot of linkage for this aspect as well.
Yeah. It seems like what you're saying, there's a virtuous cycle, right? The material conditions create the conditions for criminality, which then reinforces that same cycle. Ambassador, let me go to you, and you know, if you can, perhaps if we sort of highlight a global South perspective, what's the perspective from the global South on the SDGs?
Well, thank you. From the perspective of many developing countries, the fundamental problem lies in the fact that SDGs are defined by the United Nations, right? But what we call the means of implementation, finance, trade, investments, are not on the hands of the United Nations. They are with the Bretton Woods institutions, they are with the international financial institutions, they are with the World Trade Organization, the private sector. This is a great challenge. I mean, we look at African countries today. Most African countries are paying more to service their debt than they can spend on health, education, and the SDGs. So, and this is why, in the context of the Summit of the Future, developing countries, and particularly African countries, are demanding a transformation of the global financial architecture. Because to succeed in the SDGs, we need to also transform the MDBs, the international financial institutions, in a way that takes into consideration the challenges and the circumstances faced by these countries. And I would say, many would say in Africa that the international financial and trade system is skewed really against their interest, against their ability to development. That's one fundamental aspect that needs to be tackled. Second, it relates to conflict. conflict hinders the SDGs also. An age of hyper-conflict, as we have seen, as we have heard yesterday, more than 90 countries in the world engaged in conflicts, highest number of conflicts since World War II, highest number of victims of conflicts since in the past 30 or 40 years. So we are in a new age of long, protracted conflicts that also have an impact on implementation of the SDGs. If you look at Sudan, if you look at Gaza, 70% of infrastructure destroyed, with also, we see the health challenges. We again, the international community is not equipped to tackle an age of conflict, where reconstruction, it's estimated that the reconstruction cost in Gaza is $50 billion. Sudan, also gigantic, etc. Which brings also, in terms of the SDGs, the importance of the peace and development link. And this is something fundamental, very dear to us in Egypt and in Africa, on the strengthening the peace and development linkage. SDGs and development is a tool of conflict prevention. We're not sufficiently integrating, making them both work together. You need peace for development and development for peace. Everybody agrees on that. But how to make that work in practice? Again, that is very challenging. It's very fragmented efforts. And this is, again, it's not a new issue. You know that there was an Egyptian Secretary General of the United Nations, Boutros Ghali, and the new agenda for peace goes back to his original agenda for peace in 1992. But he issued just after the agenda for peace an agenda for development. And he made the link between the two very strongly. And the UN has struggled also, despite, again, agreeing to this, to really make these two fundamental streams of international effort work together. So what we really need is for the SDGs to work is a redesign of international cooperation, a reform of the international financial architecture, and really making the peace development nexus work on the ground effectively and be equipped for a new age of conflicts that have far-reaching implications on developments, on livelihood, on many aspects.
Yeah, I think there's a connection between many of the things we've heard. So the international financial framework, you know, the future of democracy and the future of demographics. Let's put that all to an empirical case study, you know, something that happened in reality. And I think the perfect one for that is the rise of far-right populism in Europe, particularly in the way that we've seen it recently, and particularly this weekend, you know, in the sort of German elections, where there were two states, one of which, for the first time ever since World War II in German history, voted for the first far-right government in a state election, came number one. And it came just very closely second in the state of Saxony in Germany, the East German state. And then before that in France, in the first round of voting of the snap elections, you know, you also saw Marine Le Pen's party come very high up in the polls. So it seems to me like all of these issues are at the heart of this sort of idea of far-right populism rising in Europe. But ironically, or perhaps paradoxically, we don't see these parties yet in government. You know, we see tactical voting in France in the second round of elections. We see in Germany all the other parties making a coalition against the far-right party. So let me start with President Turk, which is if we're talking about a democracy that delivers, and if the will of the people says that they're concerned, frustrated about immigration, and if politicians respond to that by not including the parties that get the most votes in government, does that not only alienate those same voters?
Well, you see, democracy is a beautiful thing. But democracy is also a problem, and democracy has to deal with problems. In Club de Madrid, which is an organization of more than 100 former democratically elected presidents and prime ministers, we have looked at these things quite systematically during the time of the COVID pandemic, because COVID pandemic has really produced a huge stress on societies at every level, individual level, family, democratic polities, and all that. And we have looked at that. We produced a report called Democracy and Emergencies, Lessons from the COVID-19 Pandemic for Democratic Resilience, where we discuss the problems of democratic institutions and what should be done to make those institutions more sturdy and resilient, the problem of social justice and fairness, which has deteriorated further during that period, and where new policies are needed, and third, on democratic culture. These are the three areas in which we focus. I shall give you a copy of that report, Mr. Moderator, ceremoniously after this panel is over, and I can tell you that this report can be found on internet with Club de Madrid. It's online, so it's easy to find. Now, I'm saying this because we have to understand that democracy shouldn't be just worshipped, as we often hear in the international discussions. Democracies have to fight autocracies. Democracies are good, autocracies are bad. All this is, there is some truth in all this, but that's very insufficient. That's completely insufficient. Democracies are also a problem, and they have to look into their problem seriously. Now, I'm saying this again with an experience of the last 30, 35 years, where in the 90s there were movements created. New and restored democracies was one of them. Community of democracies was another one. UN had projects to strengthen democratic changes at the grassroots levels and so forth. And all that was part of a changing reality which was taking a positive direction. Now that era is gone, and democracies have to come back to the drawing board and figure out solutions. Democracies must deliver. That's the central idea. And then, of course, we are talking about global issues in the spirit of something which is part of our reality, parallel realities. We shouldn't be deluded by political sloganism or purely normativistic view of things. We have to look into the core problems and understand them. And one of them is that you're not doing any good by propagating democracy in abstract and pushing for democracy for geopolitical reasons. That's not the way forward. We have to understand that democracy is like love. It has to come from within. Now, Slovenia is the only country in the world which has love in its name. When you came to Bled, you have seen this. So I think we are entitled to talk about this. We're entitled to say we love democracy, but we know that we have to improve ourselves in order to be adequately democratic to deal with the problems of our era. And of course, if you extrapolate this to a global level, democracy shouldn't be seen as a propagandistic instrument. Democracy shouldn't be seen as a geopolitical instrument. Democracy has to be seen as a human need of people, and then you have to turn to your people as a democratic leader and have to deliver for your people. Now, that's very difficult because political interests are quite diverse and much is masquerading under the terminology of democracy. But you asked me what I think, and as you have noticed, I'm quite emotional about these things.
Yeah, I mean, it's an issue that's important to you, but you've painted out, I think, the problem really well, right? But my question is more specifically, and just as a follow-up, you speak to so many sort of heads of state, former heads of state. What's one lesson, perhaps, that you've learned about how they should deal specifically with the challenge of far-right populism? If you were to speak to Scholz or to Macron, what's the right response to this?
Well, look, there is no single response. Yeah. I mean, as member of Club de Madrid, I was sent for missions where countries needed advice and discussion. So I was in places like Sri Lanka. I went to Jaffna Peninsula, which has come out of a bitter civil war, and talk to people in detail about things without pretending that I come with solutions. I don't have solutions, but I can be, I can be a partner in a discussion as representative of, Club de Madrid. And I don't want to propagate that. I just want to say that there is a need for a discussion where country-specific solutions are being worked out. In Armenia, where I was also, the situation was very different. It was how to support the market-oriented small businesses in Armenia, largely led by women. Mm-hmm. To a hall like this with as many people like here, and all women, young women who are establishing their companies. And they were really very interested about this experience of Slovenia. Again, I didn't come to lecture there. We were engaged in a discussion. So, in short, there are many questions that are mostly country-specific or situation-specific, and they have to be given specific answers. International cooperation can help, but the answers will come from within. And again, democracy is a little bit like love.
Christian, let me go to you, and just picking up where President Turk left off. You pointed out in your previous comments that the need for immigration and the demographic decline in many parts of Europe. And again, I was studying this case of Germany, the two states that voted for the AfD in the highest numbers, right? These are the two states that are suffering most from demographic decline in Germany. Both of them are projected to lose between 20 to 40% of their workforce before 2030, in the next 6 years, right? So if they're losing those record amounts of their workforce, and they're also opposed to replenishing the population through more immigration, well, what do we do then? How do you reconcile, on the one hand, the need for more immigration, on the other hand, the constantly receding support for it in places like Germany?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, Manas, and I'm not a Germany expert, so I'm not going to pretend to be one, but I will comment a little bit on the situation which we all have been following, of course. I mean, it looks like the two states that you referenced are also two of the states with the lowest share of foreign population, actually, in Germany. So this kind of very lazy media headlines that we have been seeing about these states responding, to immigration, especially from different ethnicities and races, and this perhaps prompting people to vote in a more intolerant direction are false, at least in terms of the numbers, in terms of the demography. But in terms of the overall demographic situation and population aging, Germany as a whole has been suffering a lot from this. And I would like to echo the comment made by President Turk before. I mean, it's definitely the case of a diagnostic approach being required to populism. You go to each country, to each specific context, and you try to diagnose the specific problems facing that country. There is no silver bullet here. There is no one solution. But one of the most commonly proposed solutions in general, of course, is to just focus on the underlying socioeconomic situation, rather than dismissing people as politically or ethnically intolerant. And, of course, Germany has been underinvesting a lot recently. It has been suffering, first of all, the most probably in Europe from the aftermath of the war in Ukraine, but it has also responded to the crisis in a very passive fashion, refusing to, of course, increase public spending, being perhaps over-concerned about its public debt. And this has, of course, caused some frustrations among voters. Now, there are much bigger historical factors at play here. I mean, East German states, unfortunately, have a long track record by now of supporting populist parties, both on the far left and far right. But we definitely shouldn't ignore either socioeconomics or demography when we talk about this. And of course, when I think of my region of expertise and also of origin, Central and Eastern Europe, it is clear that not only far right, but even more mainstream, if you like, conservative parties are always better placed to exploit these anxieties of population aging. We see that conservatives, this kind of vocabulary simply comes naturally to them, to sort of articulate this picture of demographic decline as a form of apocalypse, if you like. And one of the challenges that we face as population researchers and practitioners is to try and paint these demographic phenomena that I have been speaking about today as ideologically neutral phenomena, to go back to the very kind of objective socioeconomic negative, usually, implications that stem from them that I tried to point out in the beginning. And just as a final point, perhaps for now, especially in the CEE region, where we're also seeing a lot of emigration of young and therefore usually more progressive people, although even that picture is changing because we're seeing now in these German elections that young voters have been some of the staunchest supporters of the populist parties. But generally it is the case of young and more progressive people emigrating away from Eastern Europe and therefore leaving behind them a more conservative population, which then in turn is more likely to support conservative politicians and parties.
Yeah. And let's drill down perhaps into the socioeconomics of this, because you pointed this out, Ambassador. As you pointed out, Christian, sometimes these are socioeconomic anxieties that are captured by ideological agendas. Germany's been underperforming. It's the worst performing economy in the G7 since 2018. Second quarter of this year, the economy actually contracted, right? One of the only, or possibly the only economy in Europe to shrink at the same time when the Russian economy is growing, right? And so you're faced with these problems. Here's my question to you, which is, on the one hand, we want countries of the global south want the international financial framework to be reworked to support them. On the other hand, there's countries in the global north, countries like Germany, which, even if there's a somewhat slight decline in economic productivity, it leads to these political ramifications that are worse for developing countries. How do you reconcile these two?
Thank you. I think, we have been witnessing a rise in inequality, global inequality. That really has taken a scale unprecedented a bit between countries, but also within societies. And that inequality is rising, is linked to a number of economic policies, monetary policies, financial policies. And the lack of willingness to tackle or to address this inequalities through public policy, through taxation. We see it also in the issue of the International Tax Convention in the UN and the opposition to it. That is making political forces who do not want to tackle the socioeconomic aspect to resort to identity but they're all linked, including trade policies. I just want to mention there was an African president from a Sahel country who was asked about a region in his country where there's a particular source of migrants going to Europe. And he explained that in that region, there had been a collapse of the agricultural system and agricultural production as a result of subsidized imports from abroad and in Europe. So the agriculture subsidies in some countries, etc., and their impact there's a direct link of not reforming that. This is something developing countries, African countries have demanded with, migration flows. So it's all linked in terms of not willing to reform international and financial monetary policies, not tackling global inequality and the migration issue. But also broader than Europe, we are witnessing, and that goes back again to my area, in conflict, in many parts of the world, we are witnessing what I would call the weaponization of identity. By political forces to pursue political objectives, and by terrorist groups, by others, and that is really again creating humongous challenges in terms of conflict resolution, because conflict resolution is easier between groups who have different political interests, but once identity politics come into play, it becomes much more complex. But even in those cases, again, there is socio-economic factors at work, grievances, and again, lack of tackling, again, all these global imbalances we find in finance, in monetary policy, in trade, and other aspects.
Yeah, so those imbalances between the North and the South are linked. They're not competing priorities. Madam President, let me come to you with a slightly different question. I think we're having this conversation perhaps at the perfect time. Because we saw news last night that Vladimir Putin, war criminal Vladimir Putin, made a state visit to Mongolia. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Mongolia is a member state of the ICC, and as a result has an obligation, both a moral obligation, but also a concrete legal obligation to arrest Putin, given that the ICC issued a warrant for him last year. And yet we saw pictures of him coming off the plane, being greeted by state officials, and Mongolia refused to arrest him. So my question is this. When you see events like these, when you see countries that are party to the ICC effectively violate its most core tenets, what do you think that does to the credibility of the ICC and its international standing?
Yes, indeed. Of course, it's regrettable that we have a situation where the states parties are not able to cooperate with the court. I think it is essential that the court is able to continue to focus on its core function as a judicial and impartial institution. And it's for the states parties to allow it to do so and support it to do so. So there are many ways how states parties shall and can cooperate with the court, especially as the court does not have police forces of their own. It cannot arrest indictees, since it's that there is no territory of the International Criminal Court per se. So we need definitely cooperation by states parties. And under certain conditions also other states. We need the cooperation by international organizations. We need the cooperation of NGOs. So the court can only function if this cooperation exists. And the Rome Statute does have certain mechanisms how this is being dealt with. Of course, I would not go into the field of the judiciary, which shall determine whether non-cooperation has happened. That is for the court to decide. But if there is such a situation, the issue may be referred to the Assembly of States Parties, and then, of course, the states parties shall look into what measures can be taken. The Rome Statute does not provide any specific. It does not describe the nature of the measures that the Assembly can do in such situations. But of course there are concrete issues that can be done, and the Assembly has already before agreed on certain procedures how this can be handled, and also a very concrete toolkit what kind of reactions it may entail.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up, if I was to go into that, what is that toolkit? Because on the one hand, I understand the ICC doesn't have its own police force, doesn't have that jurisdiction. On the other hand, on the softest end, you've got words of condemnation, which we've heard before, which we know don't work. In the middle of that spectrum, is there anything that the ICC can do? And as President of the Assembly of States, when you see countries like Mongolia, let's say if the court finds that there's been non-cooperation here, which I think is likely, then what do you think should be the concrete legal consequences to a country like Mongolia, especially as the international community watches on?
I said that the Rome Statute does not describe the nature of measures, but what is clear that the measures that the Assembly of States Parties can do is it's not of a judicial nature. Mm-hmm. So it is more of those soft measures that are at hand for the Assembly of States Parties, and of course that is what is, and also states, individual states, we see them reacting against such situations. So I think the political and diplomatic measures are very much the ones that are being used.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, it sounds like we're at a situation that is sort of truly unprecedented, so we'll have to wait to watch exactly how the court and the Assembly of States react. I want to go to sort of questions from the audience as well. We've had a very vibrant discussion. I'm sure there's plenty. But before I do that, could I have the young BSF, are there any in the room, put their hand up, part of the younger program? Maybe they're a little bit shy. That's okay, we'll come back to you. I'm going to ask one final question, and we'll go sort of rapid fire. Please limit your answers to less than 60 seconds, and then I'll turn to audience questions. And my question is this, which is, we have this neoliberal orthodoxy. To put it simply, we think everything can be measured in economic progress and GDP. But maybe it can't. Maybe there's other dimensions of progress and of prosperity that we aren't capturing through this sort of, much more crude measure. If I were to go around the panel and ask you, what's one dimension of stability, of peace, of prosperity? What's one dimension? What should we be measuring that we don't measure right now that is an indicator of the things that we want to see happen at Summit of the Future beyond economic measures like GDP? Ambassador, can I start with you?
Well, I mean, the criticism against GDP is a long one. You have the human development reports of UNDP that focus on human development. But I would say, I would go back to inequality. I mean, it's only been a couple of years that we are grappling with measuring inequality. I mean, the French economist Thomas Piketty had this milestone work on measuring inequality. So I think even if a society GDP growth, but the inequalities grow also, that is extremely problematic and creates social tensions that impact the political spectrum. And we see it, as I was mentioning. So that would be an issue that we need to better measure and understand beyond GDP and tackle.
Exactly the need for this sort of ideological identity politics.
Yeah.
We're seeing damaging effects of. Madam President, what's one indicator, one measure that we're overlooking right now?
That may well go beyond my field of expertise. I'm not sure whether I know all the details what are being measured, but if I have to raise something, that I would say that in the field of fighting impunity, it's not only the number of court rooms or such, but also the quality of justice that is being delivered.
Yeah. And do we have any way to measure the quality of justice being delivered? Well, or is that something to be developed?
That would be something to be being developed.
Yeah. President Turk.
Well, to put it simply, I think there is economists are familiar with the so-called Gini coefficient, named after Italian economist Corrado Gini, who actually calculated the inequalities through a specific coefficient. And that, I think, is a very good point of departure for anything, that we need everything beyond the GDP and other quantitative measurements. Now, we have to be aware of the complexity of the issue. I remember when I was president, I was watching the work in OECD and in other places. There was a study by three prominent economists, Amartya Sen, Joseph Stiglitz, and Fitoussi, about those issues, and that produced a report that thick, which was unfinished and was never finished. So it's not easy to come to a definitive answer, but we have a good point of departure. Corrado Gini coefficient. Let's start with that. Let's make it universally used, and let's then take policy decisions based on the need to improve the picture of each country based on the calculation on Gini coefficient.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. An existing framework that exists, but we haven't been using as well.
Sure.
Christian, let me go to you.
Yeah, just a very quick comment on the growth versus inequality discussion. On a purely sort of economic, rational choice, dispassionate basis, inequality doesn't necessarily have to be a problem as long as everybody is better off, even though gaps are widening. But of course, the world doesn't work that way, and we know that the political aspect is very important, and especially in a globalized world nowadays, it's not just about inequality within countries, but also between countries. And when you can see that people are living much better lives than you are elsewhere in the world, even if you yourself are living a better life than your parents did, or especially grandparents, it's still not going to matter to you and you're still going to be frustrated. So inequality is definitely something to focus on. And just a very brief point again on education. I referenced the PISA scores earlier in one of my interventions. It's very frustrating in a world that in many metrics has been developing in the right direction for the last couple of decades, that education scores have actually been going down in most developed countries.
Yeah. Perfect. Let me turn to audience questions. Can we get a show of hands? And then I'll try to take as many as I can. First, the lady at front. I think there should be a mic.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Ann Linde. I'm the former Foreign Minister of Sweden. One thing that is clear is that the normative changes from 1945 till now is immense. It's gender issues, it's climate issues, it's minority issues. And I know that President Turk, whom I've been working together with on the second charter, yes, also is very pessimistic. But is there something we can do in the Summit of the Future to let it show that there is now a new reality for women to take part, for you to take part, for climate action? There are proposals like every second or every third general secretary should be a woman, or that we should have a special council for nature resources and climate. But otherwise, could you give us some hope in changing the changed reality in normative sense could be reflected in the Summit of the Future? Thank you.
Yeah. President Turk, should we go to you first? You've been roughly pessimistic. Is there a note of optimism?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I don't think I was particularly pessimistic. I just explained what the situation is. and where a breakthrough may be needed, and that breakthrough depends on the political leaders. Now, Summit of the Future is an intergovernmental, interstate affair, and people who will be sitting there and taking decisions are heads of state and government. So, my focus was on that. Obviously, there is a vast reality beyond that. And if one talks, for example, of equality of women, for example, that big problem, I think the Summit of the Future may not be the best moment for a breakthrough or for any major innovation. But next year, UN will organize a World Social Summit, and that will deal with social development in a more focused manner. And of course, 50% of population are women, and most affected part of the population as far as social policies are concerned are women again. So I would see that as an important opportunity to come with some innovative ideas. Now, whether that would change the reality or not, I cannot say. But there is a role for each of these events, and each of those roles is different. Minister, you and I were recently discussing the idea of the second UN Charter. Now, that kind of idea cannot be adopted by the United Nations as an intergovernmental institution, but it has to be offered from elsewhere, from people like you and me, who produce proposals for which the time will come. And of course, maybe some elements of those proposals can be taken advantage of more early, and others less later. So, I'm not particularly pessimistic. I just see the reality as being very difficult and very complicated, and of course this search for an approach has to take different directions, and different things have to be explored. One of them will be explored in the United Nations meetings directly, others in other places. And of course, we haven't touched upon all the problems that characterize multilateralism today. I mean, our discussion hasn't been complete, really. But I think that the discussion has shown some of the areas where breakthrough is most needed, and where the responsibility of leaders of states is most visible. And that, I think, is there, and let's see what happens.
Ambassador, thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Just to answer very concretely, I would say youth. There's really a big sign of hope from the Summit of the Future on youth voices. I mean, there will be a dedicated document coming out in addition to the Pact of the Future with it on promoting youth voices and their role in addressing contemporary challenges. And this is really an important shift. I mean, we have not seen such a shift in recent years. And there's now a youth envoy office in the UN. There's an assistant secretary general, a youth assistant secretary general, and everywhere, regionally, internationally, there's really bringing forward youth voices in a way we haven't seen. And I think that is a sign of hope that I think the Summit of the Future will reflect, will crystallize this, and will give us a lot to build on also in terms of making sure that youth voices are better heard, and youth are mobilized to address some of the challenges we have been talking about. Thank you.
Excellent. Let's go to the gentleman in the first row. And if you could also state your name, your affiliation, and if your question is directed to the whole panel or to someone in particular.
I have a comment, a suggestion.
Sure.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ibrahim Nuhum. I'm from Mali originally, but I'm from Slovenia also. I'm living in Slovenia for almost 45 years. And my question is, I want to say, to congratulate the organizer for this issue, because we are talking about parallel wars, different wars. And we are living on the same planet, but we are living in different worlds, in different realities. So we have to accept the realities and looking for solution. Maybe for a future, as an African, as a continent, coming from a continent, the second largest continent in the world, with a population of around 1,040,000 people, I request that Africa may have a permanent seat in UN. Because we will not allow that another countries talk in our names. We are so intelligent also that we can track our names. Okay, because we are living also in a reality, in different realities, we have to build somehow solidarity and help each other. You know, we know that there is a lot of problems in Africa concerning security, and we can help African countries they can help securities. But what has happened is that in African countries, we have a lot of insecurities, and people are not able to live correctly like in Europe. You know, if you realize, you know, here in Slovenia, every morning the children, they go to school, they have education, and they come back at home. This is not a fact in Sahel or in Sudan. I was in Sudan. This is such a beautiful country with beautiful people, peaceful people. But now what happened in Sudan is not, I don't want to take the floor, but I think that the understanding means that we have to see realities, and solidarity must be the key for our future and to help each other. If my neighbor have problems, I have to help him, not that I will come and add my problems on his problems. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for the clear, and welcome in Slovenia, and please come back in Slovenia. This is a very beautiful country. Very beautiful country, really.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you so much. And if you just go to the gentleman behind him.
Thank you very much. My name's Dr. Richard Edelman, and I'm asking the question on behalf of two things which I'm doing. So I'm the current chairman of the World Water Quality Alliance of the United Nations Environment Programme, but I'm also coordinating a program with regards to the socio-political effects of climate change, especially with regards to migration, gender equality, and conflict. And my question is that with my two aspects of my work, which I've just described, we have always been discovering the resistance of nation states to be able to give us even the data to be able to act on. Whereas the United Nations and the European Commission and the OECD, for example, and myself, we have always advocated the inclusion of cities, of municipalities, in order to be able to create a far more democratic atmosphere at a level where citizens can become truly engaged. My question is, do you think that the Summit of the Future, or, for example, the Social Summit for next year, can head towards further inclusion of municipalities and cities in order to guarantee, shall we say, not a successful democracy, but at least a step towards that? Thank you.
Yeah. And is that for the whole panel? Yeah. Anyone taking it first? It's not an easy question, yeah.
Well, I will be very brief. Yes, the short answer is yes. This is slowly happening, but it's happening too slowly. Now the UN is an intergovernmental organization, and it doesn't have an easy time in broadening the scope of its participation for different actors. I mean, there are mechanisms for that, but they are not adequate to the needs of our time. So further reforms are needed, and the second charter, which we have discussed in a different setting, is partly motivated by that need and offers some solutions for expanding the participation in the in the UN processes. So that would be one part of the answer. The second part is basic, serious reforms. I'm not going to be very detailed here, but COP conferences have become hijacked by oil lobby. So a major reform is needed. COP conferences have to be changed completely. Otherwise, they are not going to produce anything, or can produce even problematic results. So, I mean, reforms.
Yeah. Just before I go to you, Ambassador, I want to echo that point about, COP29. I was part of engaging with the dialogue process for this year's COP29, and there's one thing I learned, which, if you can walk with one thing, is at last year's COP, there were twice as more fossil fuel and oil lobbyists as there were representatives from the 10 most vulnerable climate countries, right? So you think about climate negotiations, twice as more fossil fuel lobbyists than the people that are worst affected and their representatives. If we don't have an equal playing field built into the way that these multilateral frameworks work, we can't possibly hope for equal or equitable outcomes. Let me go to you, Ambassador.
Thank you. No, but on cities, and municipal, I think it's a very important point, and I think there's much more scope to include them in the responses to global challenges. Just wanted to point out that Egypt will host this year in November the World Urban Forum, which will be really an opportunity to put a spotlight on their important role. And I think there is proposals. I think the Secretary General has done an advisory also board on local government and how to better integrate them. So I think there's efforts, but I think they're a bit still fragmented. We've been trying also to tackle this in our forum and working more with governors in Africa who have, for example, in Nigeria, have a lot of executive power and who are the front lines, again, of fighting against terrorism. And they are well organized in terms of the networks of cities and mayors, but not sufficiently plugged in then into some of these global frameworks. And there's a kind of a bridging role to be done, working with their networks and their associations. And in the climate space, mayors and cities are very active, but we need them also on other issues, on migration, on peace, on some of these other issues. Thank you.
Yeah. I also think one of the roles that cities can play is also reactive, right? After these conferences happen. And you think about the Paris Agreement, when Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement, right? You had some countries speaking out against it, but it was also cities within the United States that said, actually, no, we're going to make sure that our city adheres to the Paris Agreements, even if on a federal level we're pulling out. And I think that coming to the fore more is an important idea. I think we have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions if we can make it quick. Any hands in the audience? Yeah, can I go to the gentleman right at the back?
Mentioned today, we have SDGs as an attempt to measure what's going on with changes we want to achieve. Or President Turk was mentioned Gini coefficient. So how you see the possibility of data-based policy, or at least confronting politics with the facts in the way these indicators may help us? I don't know if I'm clear with...
Yeah. Would you point it to anyone in particular?
President Turk or someone who feels like...
Okay, well, look, just very briefly, and I'm sure that Ambassador will have more to say about this. I think that United Nations has the best, or one of the best, statistical systems in the world. I mean, very credible, very complete, very realistic. The availability and reliability of statistical data is not perfect, it's not equal. So, I mean, there are problems. But the UN Statistical Commission and the Statistical Division of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs belong to the strongest but not very well advertised parts of the UN system. So I think that it is perfectly possible to do that. Now, in the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals, an attempt was made in 2015, 16, 17. Then, of course, it was discovered that the goals are so ambitious and have so many different targets that makes the project of statistical handling of this extremely difficult. And, of course, the political circumstances were not helpful either. So I think what would be needed now is to agree on a more manageable core of statistical information so as to improve the quality of diagnostics. That could be done through statistics. And that's doable. That's doable. It just needs proper political and institutional support of the United Nations. And on that basis, of course, one can come to a more realistic perception of the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals. And that will be necessary anyway, because the year 2030 is approaching. And if there are leaders who want Sustainable Development Goals to continue, something like that has to be worked out.
Yeah. There's a clock ticking, so I'll go right to my last question. which will keep it to under 60 seconds, sort of rapid fire style for everyone. I liked when Eddie Rama said yesterday on the opening leaders panel about how sometimes frustrating it is for young people to constantly get advice from the generations above them. And so often, when we talk about youth inclusion, Summit of the Future, bringing young people into the conversation, let me flip the question a little bit and put it to the panelists. What's one piece of advice that you have gotten in your career from a young person or learned from a young person that's been most helpful to you? Ambassador, can I start with you?
What I have, again, in the Aswan Forum, when we had a youth forum there also, and I'm very impressed. African youth are questioning, actually. You tell them this is how things, they question why are things this way, and it has really impacted me there. I mean, I'm a diplomat. I've been dealing with these international rules and norms and set up for many years, but it is being questioned fundamentally. Why certain countries have these positions to head international organizations forever and they inherit them. Why? Why is that the case? Why do we accept that? So it's the questioning of some of the things we take for granted that is really, I found, very refreshing and will have a lot of implications, again, for the future.
Mm-hmm. Madam President?
First, I would say that part of the youth are rather afraid of the future, and they see the climate change and those issues very as a gloomy future, and that of course really is painful for me to listen to that this is the world that we have given to our children. But on the other hand, I think I don't have any substantial advice, but I think. In general, many of the young people are really optimistic. They are very energetic. Ambassador said that they question our decisions and the way we've done things. So I think that also really is an advice for all of us that let's not give up.
And that optimism is infectious.
Yeah.
Mr. President.
Well, I think the young people have the unique capacity to surprise and confuse. I'm saying this on the basis of particular political experience. In Club de Madrid, we are organizing meetings with what we call young political leaders. And in one of those meetings, I asked a representative of those young leaders from Africa, how do they use social media? And the answer was, yes, well, that's wonderful, because we have discovered that the established politicians know nothing about social media, and they now became scared. And in one of the countries, the president started to convene tea parties with what is called influencers. And those influencers have huge fun when they go to the president's residence and they discuss things with him. They don't give any promises, but they keep the president alert. And, young people will always be able to surprise. They will come with new things. And, of course, they will have to come with new things because, the future of the world is theirs.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And, Christian, let me go to you. What's an advice you've gotten from your peers, let's say?
Yeah, technically I'm still in the youth bracket, so I hope that Eddie Rama wouldn't have a problem with me talking about my own generation. Of course, my generation has grown up with the issue of climate change as an existential issue for all of us. And one concern that I hear a lot from young people even younger than me, as a demographer, is that they're not considering having children because they don't think it's ethical to reproduce at a time of climate change. I'm not a big fan of this argument. I've never particularly understood it, but I sympathize with the sentiment, right? I sympathize with this anxiety among young people. And my answer to that usually is that we have this existential burden upon our shoulders, but we can't give up. The solution can't be, to say, well, we live in a difficult world, so we'll just, throw in the towel. We have to realize that we shouldn't individualize these issues, and the right ways to deal with climate change, of course, and any other challenges is to put pressure on our governments to come up with systemic solutions rather than individualizing the problem.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm just realizing that, the panel was on Summit of the Future, and I think we, incorporated almost every aspect of it, from migration, the, deficit in democracy, from impunity and criminality, to the perspectives from the Global South and the international framework or on finances. So, what an exceptional panel. And let me also just make one final comment, which is let's make sure that this discussion doesn't die here. I feel that people at Bled are a little bit shy sometimes. So when we move out of this room, let's make sure, I'm sure all the panelists are happy to speak to the audience and vice versa. Let's make sure that if you spot any of us in any of the break sessions, we come and we have this conversation, and we keep it going, and that you keep it going with the youth participants here in particular. And with that, can we please give a huge round of applause for our brilliant panelists?
and director, not to be tortured. Ambassador Philippe Etienne. Doctor. Doctor. No, okay. And Doctor, yeah, President of the Center of International Relations. Yeah, I don't know whose phone that is. That's your. Okay. All right. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll get started. Thank you for for coming. My name is Aaron Korewa. I'm the director of the Atlantic Council's office in Warsaw. I would like to start off by apologizing on behalf of my friend and my boss, Mr. Jörn Fleck, who was supposed to moderate this panel. Unfortunately, he came down with the flu this morning, and in good conscience, he couldn't come into this room not feeling well. I just came in from Globsec, from Prague. I didn't have any official role in Bled. I was just going to be here to listen and to learn. This is my first time in Bled and in Slovenia, but here, due to unforeseen events, I'm going to have to moderate this panel. But this is a fascinating topic. We have a great panel. We have a great group of people here in the audience as well. So I'm really, really looking forward to this. The Atlantic Council's Warsaw office, we relaunched our office about 2 years ago. And we do this because the Atlantic Council, of course, is very keen on strengthening and maintaining transatlantic ties with our key allies, with America's key allies in Europe. This panel's named the Fading Pax Americana. We'll see if it is fading. But obviously, I mean, the US 2024 presidential election is a pivotal moment with far-reaching implications for global dynamics. Of course, the United States remains a key player in international affairs, and the outcome of this election will undoubtedly shape global developments and politics with understandably crucial consequences for many countries worldwide. As my good friend, Ambassador Daniel Fried, often says, and I think he's absolutely right about this, that for a long time, as an American, when you come to Europe and you speak to Europeans, you could say, look, it doesn't really matter who wins this election, because at the end of the day, the United States is going to be invested in a transatlantic relationship. Well, this year, it's not really like that. This year, you could say the outcome of this election is going to have far-reaching implications for our transatlantic ties. Should Donald Trump become president again, we could probably expect some major divergence from truths or practices that we've held for a long time. But at the same time, should Kamala Harris win, we don't know if there's going to be a continuation or a break with the policies of the Biden administration. Things are a little bit in flux. And to address this, we have a terrific panel. As I said before, we have Dr. Tobias Linder, who is the Minister of State of the German Federal Foreign Office. We have Dr. and Undersecretary Jakub Wiśniewski from the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have Dr. Natalie Toci from the Institute de Internationale Affairs. No, sorry, I'll do the American translation. Institute of International Affairs. Okay, of Italy. Yes, that was right. All right. We have Ambassador or Doctor, I don't know, Ambassador. Okay, Ambassador Philippe Etienne, who is the former ambassador to the United States of the French Republic. And we have Dr. Małgorzata Bonikowska, who is the president of the Center for International Relations Foundation of Poland. Yeah, well, the American way of doing things is always to mention the doctor PhD. Let me then kick off and start with you, Dr. Linder, Tobias. So obviously, I would like to start off with one of the topic that's not only on everybody's minds, but is also of enormous importance. I happen to believe that the war, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, is one of the most important conflicts in the world, at least since 1945. Let's be frank. That's, I firmly believe in that. And it's obviously a priority for you. And for Berlin. So I guess, to start with a very pointed question, like, how is Germany preparing for any potential shift from Washington regarding Ukraine policy? Like, should Washington all of a sudden, sharply change course and ends its support for Ukraine? What is Germany going to do? I'll start off with a nice, easy one.
Good morning, and thanks for having me, and thanks for the nice and easy question. And the usual phrase of a politician would be, "I do not speculate," and so on and so forth. But let's be honest. Everyone's watching what's going on in the US. Everyone's preparing for November the 5th. We do so too. So what I can say is that we are trying to review and to estimate the policies of the both candidates and to set up scenarios, what could happen if A or B is elected, and so on and so forth. And for sure, Ukraine is one part of that analysis. That's true. And if we are honest, Europeans and Americans need each other vis-à-vis when it comes to support for Ukraine, be it military support, be it reconstruction, be it humanitarian assistance. None of the two sides can do it alone. And how should we prepare? I'm convinced we need continuously to speak with people in Washington, with people in both teams, in both camps, around the candidates, as well as on the Hill. And we need at least to try to convince American politicians, lawmakers, people in the White House, that it's not only about our own security interests and it's not a conflict in the backyard of Europe or something. This is really a fundamental threat, this aggression, to the international rules-based order. And it's also intertwined with American security interests. And to be blunt, if Europe should be left alone with this, then Europe would need to focus on it. And I have understood that the United States, is a country with two coasts and two oceans on both sides. And if in Washington people expect that the Europeans stand up when it comes to security in the Indo-Pacific, if they want us to understand that our security is also interlinked to the Indo-Pacific, it's vis-à-vis with American support for security here in Europe. That would be my answer. And try to explain it continuously, explain it more often, and at least try the best. If in the end someone would say we cancel the whole support, okay, then we are in a new game. But don't get desperate and believe we will end up in that game. Do the best that it comes differently. That would be my answer.
Thank you. Then moving on, Jakub, over to you. So, I mean, obviously Poland has largely benefited, I mean, both under the Trump and the Biden presidencies. Let's be frank about that. So sort of how are you looking into these, this potential second term for either of them? I mean, of course, would a more inward-looking America, what would that mean for Poland? Because, I mean, the office is based in Warsaw. We all know that Poland places a lot of importance on the transatlantic ties for security, but let's say you're faced with a more inward-looking America. What are you going to do then? And particularly if you can address this from the point of view of the upcoming Polish presidency of the EU in January. I mean, it's kind of an opportunity to sort of start and kick off this relationship, whoever sits in Washington in a positive way. Poland has a chance to do that. So what do you, please share some thoughts on that.
Do I turn it on? Yes.
Yes.
So I'm a diplomat, and every diplomat, like every human, has two ears. And I think it's our job to listen with this ear for good news more than with the other ear where bad news comes. And people during election campaigns say strange things. And I think we should not attach too great importance unless we want to find ourselves in trouble where we contribute to self-fulfilling prophecy, where sometimes loosely structured remarks create some frameworks which put us in the confrontational manner. So my message is, and actually that of my government, is keep calm and carry on. Degree of healthy stoicism is in store. That does not mean that we are not getting prepared. It does not mean that we are not using our positive experience from the times when President Trump had relatively positive relations with Warsaw. I think that we put money where mouth is as regards, say, military expenditure. We show that we care about NATO, but at the same time, we want to develop, and this is something new as regards as Polish governments go, we want to show that there is a second pillar to the Polish security insurance policy, which is the European Union. We have to, shortly speaking, if there is less America in Europe, there needs to be more Europe in Europe. That means we have to deliver ourselves. be it about Ukraine, be it about enlargement and our neighborhood. I'm not saying, and Natalie will confirm, how difficult it is to speak about geopolitical Europe and then deliver, because nation states do not transform magically into some imagined community where national selfish interests sometimes are already dropped or cast away. But we can find a consensus, and we have to sort it out, and this is where the Polish presidency comes. We will be the first after Hungarian presidency, and we want to show that we are different, that we care about European interest, that we care about Ukraine. And actually this war is not only about existence of Ukraine, it's about us Europeans, whether we can be sovereign, where we can be self-sustaining actor, and where we can have policies on our own. And this is also about global matters. Europe for too long has been silent or not vocal enough about what it means to have assertive relations with China, about Global South. There is clear misunderstanding, and very often we Europeans find ourselves in strange position where we are criticized over Gaza. So to bring back values to our political stance as Europe, this is one of the themes of the upcoming Polish presidency.
Thank you. Well, we'll drill down a little bit on that later, hopefully. But then, Natalie, over to you. I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here because, of course, you moderated a similar panel during the Munich Security Conference where you had J.D. Vance, who is now a hopeful in the American election. So, to put it bluntly, I guess, like, after listening to what he said in Munich, are you convinced that Pax Americana is sort of the complete decline of Pax Americana? And I will, I will use the moderator's prerogative to just it will be a double question, because the second question is, of course, you once said that a return of the Trump presidency, I have to quote you right here, would be, quote, the crisis that breaks the EU's back, end quote. So, is the EU destined to failure if Trump returns to the White House?
So,
easy question.
On the first question, let me start off by saying that Pax Americana is already over. And it has been over for the last 10, 15 years, more or less, perhaps 20. We could go back to 2003. If by Pax Americana what we mean is a US-led international order premised on US hegemony in the international system. That world has gone. It was nice while it lasted, but that world has gone. Now, where does the Trump-Harris story come into this? So that world has gone, and I would say that probably the first US president that acknowledged it and acted upon it was Barack Obama, right? And here comes the story, right? Because you can react, the US can react to the end of Pax Americana in two diametrically opposite ways. You can act on it by basically saying, we understand that we can no longer run the show on our own, and therefore the consequence of that conclusion is that we have to double down on alliances and partnerships and redistribute responsibility amongst our allies and partners. Or you can react to that same conclusion or that same premise by basically saying, and therefore, given that we don't have the power to run the world, we have to ensure that we simply run ourselves and kind of, look into what our security interests are construed in a very narrow sense, and therefore isolationism, or in a sense, going into a more J.D. Vancian probably approach, prioritize on what really matters, and that is China. So same premise, two diametrically opposite conclusions. So in a sense, the structural story is that Pax Americana is over. The agency story is that you can react to it in very different ways. Now, coming to the second question, the point is that those two diametrically opposite sort of responses to the structural story is hugely consequential to Europe, right? Because in a sense, line one, you double down on alliances and partnerships, is great news for Europe, right? I mean, in a sense, this can actually rebalance the relationship and make it perhaps a more equal partnership, encourage Europeans to take more responsibility, but that doesn't come to the expense of the transatlantic relationship. Option number two is catastrophic for Europe. It was in the first Trump administration, but it is much more so, which is where, in a sense, the danger really lies in a context that we're in today, which is very different from that of 2016, in which there is war on the European continent. It is our war. So, in a sense, and this comes to the point of, what do we do about it? Yeah, I mean, if you have two very different options with two very different sets of consequences for the EU, how do you prepare for that? Instinctively, one would be inclined to assume that therefore you should prepare in very different ways. The good sort of side of the story in this rather bleak scenario is that actually I think that the policy recipe for Europe is exactly the same, whether it is a Harris win or whether it's a Trump win. That we should double down on our democratic resilience given that our democracies are in danger is something which is true in the United States, it's true in Europe, and we should do something about it regardless. That we should double down on defence, including European defence or a European pillar within NATO, and basically assume greater responsibility for Ukraine is something that we should do regardless of a Trump or a Harris win. That we should no longer be starry-eyed vis-à-vis China, but at the same time figure out exactly how to both, in a sense, protect vis-à-vis China, but not ensure that this leads to a protectionism, and certainly not one that, on the one hand, disables us to meet our climate targets, as well as to retain a sort of free trading system. Again, these are choices that apply whether it's a Harris or a Trump win. Now, obviously, and here is, I think, the paradox in this, that the Trump scenario is one which, on the one hand, puts us on the verge of a potential precipice, but certainly galvanizes us into action, right? I mean, maybe we fail, and this is where the risk of, the camel's back eventually breaking come in, but we're certainly going to do something about it. We're going to try to do something about it because we won't have a choice. The danger, paradoxically, in a Harris scenario is that we're going to sit back and relax, yeah? But that structural story that I started off is going to be the same regardless of these two scenarios.
Very good point to end on. Agency, right? European agency. A slight shift of gears, maybe, Philippe, Ambassador. You are, of course, ambassador to Washington in what many people identified as challenging times, not least from economic point of view. For those of you who don't know, you were ambassador both during the Trump and the Biden administration. And from the economic perspective, obviously there was a trade war under Trump, but then under Biden was the passage of the IRA, which shocked a lot of people in Europe, not least in Paris. So I guess, again, a pointed question to you. I mean, do you see more or less divergence on trade policy with the next American administration, whichever one it may be?
Thank you very much first for inviting me to the Bled Strategic Forum. Thank you, Secretary General. I want also to say hello to the American friends I see in the room. Indeed, this experience as ambassador of France to the United States was quite a very interesting one. Under two administrations, I was also lucky enough to be in contact with Kamala Harris, but also with Tim Walz and with J.D. Vance. So I find now the whole situation and the electoral campaign really interesting, remembering my life in Washington and in the United States. But before that, I was also ambassador in Germany and permanent representative to the European Union. And my experience in the United States, I took it from the point of view of a European, and I completely agree with Natalie. When Joe Biden was elected, there was a sense of relief, and the Europeans tending to sit back. And whatever the result of the US election, whatever the decision of the American people will be, the Europeans have to take their own decisions. And I come to your question on Trade and Inflation Reduction Act. It is not a surprise, and it is not even shocking that the American presidents, whoever they are, take the decisions they deem the best for the American people. It's also for the Europeans to do the same. And it's what I say is, in particular, I apply it to the Inflation Reduction Act. We have to consider that we are in a situation where Europe is in a danger of losing a strategic race in technology, in the technologies of the future. The outgoing European Commission and the European member states have started to react. And there is much more to do. They have started to react on the side of defense, on the side of technology, and reindustrialization or attracting investments to Europe. But this is something really we must do very, very much, very quickly, and with a much greater intensity. Again, whatever the result of the American elections will be. But of course, the result is very consequential. It is not the same according to the result. And I come to the question of trade. There is a consensus under the control of the American friends who are here across the American parties, the two big American parties on trade, which is that it is not, the United States is not anymore for free trade agreements, clear, and takes its decision even, I must say, it's regrettable from a European point of view, but independently from the rules of the World Trade Organization. There is a certain amount of consensus across, and it's linked with domestic policy. It's linked with the necessity to regain the support of the blue wall, the middle class, the working class among the American voters. That's clear. On the other hand, under Donald Trump, when he was president, we witnessed measures, very aggressive measures, directed against the European Union. And I will quote two of the measures, one who was taken, one who was on the verge to be taken. The first one is on steel and aluminium, which was to impose tariffs against European countries, allied countries, based on a legal base which was linked to national security. Of course, there was a technical explanation to prevent circumvention from Chinese imports of steel through other markets. But it was kind of really special to have extra tariffs against allies based on this legal base. And Donald Trump has announced he would do the same across the board of all products now, 10 to 20%. And the second example is the digital services tax, where we were about to have extra tariffs against European allies. And here, and I will close here my first answer, we must be aware of the fact that the issue is not only trade and deficit, it's more and more also a regulatory and legislation issue. The digital services tax was about the introduction in some jurisdiction of a tax on digital services. Now we have in place in Europe new legislations on digital, DSA, DMA, but also on sustainability, CS due diligence directive, for instance, deforestation. There is also a lot of, we have the CBAM on climate-related imports. We have a lot of discussions to have. So according to who will be elected, there is clearly a potential big difference here. And my hope is that whatever the result is, still we can return to a very sound transatlantic dialogue based, for instance, on what has been started, the Trade and Technology Council, but going deeper and discussing those divergences we have on some legislation, because finally we continue to agree on the essential, and the essential is, of course, democracy.
Well, it was yet another call for European agency and action. Good.
Yeah.
In the spirit of that, Małgorzata, to you, I know that you often raise the issue of the Global South, and the Global South was mentioned by the other Polish person on the panel, which, I mean, a little unusual that it is the Poles mainly who talk about the Global South. That doesn't, I mean, as someone who lives in Poland, sometimes that is overlooked. I don't really like the term Global South in general. Maybe you can come up with a better one. But I guess, poignant question again, in the event of, a U.S. that is more insular, looks inward, what should Europe do in terms of its relationship with the Global South? Should we do anything? Is it time to step up and concrete and specific? What would that look like? What would that be?
Thank you for this question. It's really interesting to put this question to a person who comes from Poland. It didn't happen 10 years ago. And let me start by saying that I'm really grateful for the organizers, not only for having me here, but also for having two Poles in this panel. We have a proverb, when there are two Poles, there are four opinions. So maybe that's the reason for that. But in this case, I maybe disagree, because I agree very much with my colleague Jakub, who, by the way, comes also from a think tank world. And we have an excellent cooperation also with our foreign ministry. And what I want also to stress is I'm really grateful to see this panel with these people, because it just reminds me of a Weimar Triangle formula. And thank you very much for having a French, a German, a Pole, plus Italy. Not bad. Yeah, not bad.
Next time to Italy.
Italy helps. It's also a good country, big country, Just I like that, We should have these formats more often. And also a moderator is based in Warsaw.
So that's even more, I can't share my opinions.
Well.
That would be even more, it's a double up.
This is maybe, because of the topic, because we are known to be in Europe. Poland is really the most pro-American society. That's also a fact, Unlike France, for example. This is by tradition, because, of course, America was seen for us for many years as a provider of inspiration, history of fighting for freedoms, liberties, which very much is, it clicks, resonates with the Polish identity, right? So we are still pro-American, being very much, especially with this government, pro-European. So this is a good start, because I strongly believe, and Natalie maybe can help me also to clarify, the strategic autonomy concept. Maybe it started with, this feeling of being a little bit distant from the US, but actually it's in American interest. It's really in American interest having Europe very strong. What sense does it make to have a partner which is weak? Right? Just think about it. What sense does it make to just keep always, to help, always be, called for help when something happens? I think the deep American interest is to see the EU strong, also in a sense of security. Then, if you look at the map, I now recall my German colleague statement, I agree a lot, but if you look at the map, it's not only that you see that America has two oceans. Europeans forget. We think it's only transatlantic relations which matter. No, because it's the Pacific. Now, by the way, the Pacific, which is a peaceful ocean, the name comes from this, is not really peaceful at all. And Atlantic Ocean is very peaceful. So it is a shift, the attention, American attention shift to the Pacific, because there are good reasons for that. But don't forget, America has a direct border with Russia. Just look at the map. It's a direct border, as Poland. Poland has a direct border with Russia. Italy doesn't. Germany doesn't. We do. And the US too. So, for the interests of America, they cannot just completely, withdraw from Europe, because it's just to, take Russia from the other angle. Now, of course, we have to bear with the just simple statement, there will be America first, whoever will win the elections. And you can see, obviously, with the China race, of course, Biden continues what Trump started. And the race will continue. So for the US, China will be number one country and point of reference. So in this race, China, US, I don't want Europe to be squeezed and neglected. Our interest, European interest, is not to let happen that the world will go again bipolar. If this happens, Europe is not relevant. So in our interest is to keep the balance, is to try to be stronger, as all you said, by the way, I agree totally. It's the momentum. Garry Kasparov was saying yesterday about Putin's effect, right, to Europe, that Putin helped us to unite. But I would also mention Trump effect. I think between Putin and Trump, we are doing better, in this reality. We are trying to, repair the EU. So I think we have to just bear with this reality that American interest will be to build a position vis-à-vis China. And in this regard, we have to build a very strong position of the EU vis-à-vis both. Vis-à-vis both. And then I come to your question about Global South. Well, I agree with you, the name is not very good maybe, because the many countries of the Global South are not even on the South. And like Mexico, for example, maybe. And, but we have also a problem with the notion Global West. And again, there are many countries of the Global West who are not even on the West. So we have to reorganize this thinking in a way to put maybe completely different labels. But I do believe what brings us together, a part of trade, this is also another paradox, that the EU and the US do very good business. Very good business. By the way, the US is our #1 partner in trade. In services is #1, 22% of the total global trade of the EU is US, 22%. Then it's the UK, 18%. Then it's Switzerland and China. And in trade of goods, Americans are #1 provider as far as partner as far as whom we sell. It's in #2 from whom we buy. Who is #1? China. So that shows, the realities, that economically we will do with both, with China, with the US. And in this regard, maybe we are not on the same page with the US, that we don't want really to be totally, in this race. We want to be in the middle. And this brings us to the Global South perspective, because Global South also doesn't want a bipolar world. This is a difference maybe with Americans. Maybe Americans will push us a little bit into this, because it's simpler. Americans like simple things, like, this is bad, this is good, this is black, this is white. Europeans are more sophisticated, maybe. We see nothing is really, everything is gray. Yeah? Everything is complicated. And Global South adds to this vision that nothing maybe it's necessary to be even named. Asian mentality, I don't know, there are Asian colleagues with us here, maybe you could help me to explain it. It's not necessarily to name everything. Maybe we don't need a global order based on something. Maybe we will face a global disorder for decades. And the Asians are okay with that. So Poles, by the way, also we are able to survive in many different circumstances. So maybe our mentality to be able to finalize something. Now, it doesn't help because nothing will be finalized in the years to come. It will be like disorder, chaos, a lot of dynamics from different angles. But what we know, and that I conclude, is that the EU interest is to get stronger internally, that both angles, China and America, help in this process, that in American interest, it's definitely a strong Europe, and what brings us together, Americans and the Europeans, a part of trade, which will continue, is values. And I believe with some of countries of Global South is exactly the same. For example, with India, or with Indonesia, or with Japan or South Korea, let's build on the assumption every country will have our own national interests first. I think that's the reality. But in the same time, there are some countries with whom we feel better. It's like with humans, Some people you like, some people you just don't like, you don't click with. So maybe let's just try to regroup in these groups, smaller groups of countries where we can resonate better in a very complicated and not clear world.
Thank you, Małgorzata. There was a lot of thought-provoking statements there. Good. That's what we like. I don't like the term global south because there's this sort of hidden implication that they agree on everything, which of course they don't. I mean, I visited Africa 2 years ago, and I mean, certainly, I went to Ethiopia. Certainly, Ethiopia doesn't view the trade through the Red Sea the same way as, say, certain people in Yemen do, right? I mean, and both of these countries are in the quote-unquote global south, but they're hugely different. But that's just one particular example. So I know I'm sure that there are a lot of questions for our panel here. We are going to go into questions, but again, moderator's prerogative. China was mentioned a few times. As an American, I'm not sure that everybody in Europe has caught on the fact that how Americans seem to agree on how bad, speaking of black and white, China is. I'm not saying that not one in Europe understands, I'm sure they do, but maybe this is not caught on. Like one of the few things that we seem to agree on in the United States is that China is bad and that, something needs to be done about that. So I guess lightning round to everybody on the panel, and share your thoughts if you want to. If you don't, that's okay. But I mean, some in Trump's orbit are calling for a very clear, harsher stance of China. We have, of course, Robert O'Brien, his last national security advisor, who wrote that the U.S. just needs to totally decouple from China. And I guess, short but specific, like, is Europe prepared for this kind of knock-on effects of a U.S.-China trade war? And if you can give me, what is the one thing that Europe should do in that given situation? Anyone who would like to share their thoughts about that? Yes, Natalie, raise your hand first.
So, I mean, I think it's clear that Europeans on China are not where they were 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years ago, right? So there has been a hardening attitude towards China, which is partly driven or pushed by the United States, but I think it would be unfair to say that it's only driven by the United States. I think there is a recognition in Europe that there are problematic elements in the EU-European-China relationship, regardless of the United States. Having said this, I think there are 3 main differences when it comes to Europe, China as opposed to US-China, which I think are important for the US to understand in order for our relationship to be clearer on the China question. Point number 1, which actually paradoxically could even lead to a harder European stance towards China than a US one, whereas I think for the US, the question of China is a question of primacy, right? Who is going to have primacy within the international system? We Europeans, we don't have those ambitions, yeah? We know that we're not up there, right? However, for Europe, it's more a question of protection. What I mean by protection is there is greater recognition today than there was a decade ago that the way in which, there's a strategic edge to Chinese investments, for example, in Europe. So there's a difference, I think, there. For the sake of argument, if China was a shining liberal democracy, but it was the prime international player, Europe would not necessarily have a problem with that, right? As opposed to probably with the US that would. That's one, I think, main difference. The second difference has to do with, some of the issues that we've been talking about, the attitude towards trade, right? In the US, there has been a turning back against, free trade. In Europe, although, again, things are different today compared to where they were a decade ago, but still there is an attachment to free trade in a way in which, as I said, and to the multilateral system surrounding it, the WTO, that I think is certainly not there in the same way in the US. And obviously the China question fits into this debate. The third aspect, I think, is difference is climate, right? It is very clear that if there were to be a decoupling from China, particularly when it comes to green technologies, the EU will not be able to meet its climate targets, right? Of course, we should be doing more in terms of increasing our domestic production on renewables. But without the China component, in and of itself, it's not going to be sufficient. And that, again, I think is something that is more rooted in the EU compared to what it is in the US.
Okay, great. Thank you. Tobias, over to you, and then Ambassador, and then...
Okay, I'll try my best to be brief. So first of all, what's the recipe? First of all, Europeans need to understand that China is the main security concern in the US. Full stop. And that's not yet everywhere fully understood in Europe. Second, we need to try, and I hope we will succeed, to formulate and at least to update our European China strategy. What I can tell you from my own country is, roughly 1 year ago, the German government for the first time adopted a China strategy because we thought it's necessary. China today is different to the China than it was 10 years ago, so our policies need to change. And we structured that strategy into a multifaceted approach, very familiar from the European side, partnership, competition, and systemic rivalry. And we take into account that, let's say, the relative weight of systemic rivalry is growing and growing. And we need to find some measures, like we call it de-risking, not decoupling, or let's say diversification. And I know from the process how long it has taken in the German government to come to such a strategy and now to implement it, how ambitious it is to do it on the European level. But we need to do it. We cannot do it as member states alone. And if you see that the current European strategy towards China is too old, and if you see the different approaches from European countries, we are not in the best shape. I believe for the next years to come and for the new Commission, that's one of the priorities, to find, when we're speaking about strategic autonomy, to find consensus among the Europeans what are China's strategy. And last but not least, this is necessary because otherwise it's necessary to deal with China and to deal with countries in the Indo-Pacific, but it's also necessary and important to be able to deal with the American side. Because our position, as Natalie elaborated, will not be identical to the US position. We will always be closer when it comes to US vis-à-vis China. We are not in the middle. We will always be significantly closer to the US side. We have always lots of things in common. But the position is not 100 or 95 or 90, maybe, don't speak about numbers. The position is not identical in the end. But to see where we have things in common, where we can act together, where we can convince our American friends, we also see your security interests, and we are willing to act, not by the same ways and means maybe, but by others, but we are willing to act, we are willing to respect it in our economic and trade policies. We need to clarify our own position as Europeans. And if you see, I see my French colleague sitting there, if you see the recent visit of Xi Jinping in Europe, and I do not speak about Paris, I speak also about other countries, there is some necessity to come to that clarification among the European countries. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Over to you, Ambassador. And then just like a follow-up question, I guess, is there a chance that maybe Europe could reinforce the pro-free trade voices in the United States? I don't know, like propose a new TPP or something with a different acronym. Of course, you can't use the same acronym because that's going to fail, but something different to like kickstart those positive voices that are there. Maybe there was a divergence.
No,
but
I will speak on China because you asked me to speak on China. But on your follow-up question, I already answered it. I think in hoping that we can deepen the TTP, which has been created by the European Commission and the U.S. administration just after Joe Biden's election, but which has not been given its full potential. And it requests for each side, including the American side, I must say, it means to accept to go deeper and to coordinate. You mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. I said it was normal to take decisions for your country, but we need more coordination, even ex-ante coordination. This is really important. And then we can get to much more ambitious results also in our trade. But I wanted to make a couple of points on China. First, on the US, my experience, you know better, of course, as American, but it is not only, of course, as you said, Minister, we Europeans, we must be still more aware. I think we're pretty aware already, but we must be more aware about the priority of this Chinese element for
all American stakeholders. Okay, it's as a security challenge, as a technological challenge, that's clear. But there is a second dimension, as I see it in the US, which is how you manage competition. I refer to Jake Sullivan's recent visit to Beijing, for instance. This is also an issue which, whatever administration is in Washington, and for the rest of the world, it is not indifferent to see the two biggest powers, how they behave one with the other. So you have the two aspects. And Robert O'Brien is a good friend of mine, but if I were with him, I would ask him what he means by decoupling. Does he mean total decoupling, 100%, which seems unrealistic, or total decoupling for the most sensitive technological subjects, which can be quite large already? It would be interesting. The second point is that the European Union has evolved a lot in its relation with China. I witnessed it already 10 years ago when I was permanent representative to the European Union. I was also in Germany ambassador when you had the KUKA takeover, I remember. We have changed our position a lot, not only in the general, political attitude, but also on very, very specific legislative instruments. And of course, and this is a point which has been made by Natalie, by Małgorzata, we are not in the same position like the US, but like Tobias said, we are not either equidistant between the US and China. We have adopted very, very, very strong policies. And one element which has given rise to this awareness with China, I think I was in Brussels at the time, was during the financial crisis, the sovereign debt crisis, the way that some strategic infrastructures in Southern Europe were taken over by Chinese entities. Now we have grown more adult, but we are not in the same position. And you asked about the effects of this Chinese policy in the US. They are already there. And Natalie mentioned the green technologies. Look at the electric vehicles issue. Canada just followed the American lead on very high tariffs against imports of electric vehicles. All the other countries in the world now struggle and scramble with how do we do with the Chinese EVs, investment by Chinese companies or higher tariffs. So we have already today the consequences of American policies toward China. And I think we need to coordinate still better with the US and to coordinate, as I said, a bit ex ante. And my last point is one of the difference between the US and the EU towards China and the world in general is that on climate, but also on other aspects, we are in another position in Europe to have a discussion with the other continents and what you call the global south, and especially in Africa, because you have the two dimensions, transatlantic, transpacific, but who cares about the north-south dimension? And here the European Union has, I think, the best position, together with other countries, maybe like Brazil, like India, like the Middle East, like Africa. We have to contribute to what was the topic of the previous panel, the shaping of something which can be indeed a bit a disorder, as Małgorzata has said, but which must be a bit better organized. And here I think it is a role of the European Union also to discuss this with the United States to explain we must go to common positions. I cannot understand why on the WTO, for instance, even with this administration in the US, we cannot come to closer positions on reforming the WTO, for instance, because we have the same concerns about fair level playing field, for instance. We should go to a common understanding. And I think the European Union, as Natalie said, is more prone to free trade, can be the leader among the Western powers and discuss this with the United States.
Clear action item, that's great. Jakub, you raise your hand briefly because we do have to give the audience a chance.
Okay, shortly. I want to speak as a Pole, but also Central European. I think for many of us, China is ordinary people, is still an enigma. Its tanks has not have not rolled on our streets. Our people have not been massacred by Chinese, which means that there is still a lot of question marks. At the same time, we come to realize that certain illusions, especially that of these of Eurosceptics in our countries, are not well sounded. For example, that China in some magical format of 16 or 17 plus 1 can be an innocent investor, helper, maybe a lever, counterpower to some colleagues in the European Union that we do not like. No, it does not fly. And we actually come to realize, tragically, that the Chinese could end the war between Russia and Ukraine in 24 hours. Maybe more so than American president can do. So this takes the scales of our eyes. We come to realize that there is a danger, but there is also great opportunity, or at least possibility to avoid gigantic problems of decoupling. I think it's my personal opinion. Americans have a lot of illusions, these hawkish Americans, that you can cut the world Western Hemisphere from China in a very simple manner. No, go to every supermarket and 70% of goods will be Chinese. So it's very difficult, and actually you can talk reason to them. I mean, Duda, my president, was in Beijing, and of course conversations were not so easy, but he managed to get certain things out of them. For example, we are an object of hybrid war waged on us by Belarusians, who are letting all these confused migrants, sometimes even criminals, go across the border. And this is in direct contrast with Chinese interest to have a working crossing between borders of between countries of Belarus and Poland. So to make a long story short, it was the Chinese who applied some pressure on Belarusians to sort this out. And let me give you another example, because when we talk China, we need also to talk India. And very recently there was a very epoch-making visit of Modi to Warsaw, but also Kiev. I think it's a missing link in our puzzle, because without Indians, without certain pro-Western instincts among the Indians, we will not be able to navigate China very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakub. I mean, we do have to go to the audience, but I mean, I know you raised, if you could be very brief, Małgorzata, then we have...
Just 2 points. One is that really have to do our own job instead of always discussing US and China. Let's just concentrate on work. And I think that brings us to the global South countries, to the previous question. The best way to approach this China race is to do business and to have contacts with other huge countries of global South, such as India, which is, by the way, by population even bigger today. And it's with all the, weaknesses of this democracy, but it's still a democratic country. And other giants like Indonesia, all the members of G20 who are not from the West. So let's concentrate on that, because there are ways that we can withdraw business from China and move it to these countries. And it's very much in these countries' interest as well. So this will bring us much closer, and this would also repair the image of the Europeans in the regions of Global South. Don't forget, it's not the case of Central Eastern Europe, but it's the case of Western Europe. Western Europe is perceived as a former colonial power, which Russia is not. So Russia plays with this argument, and Russia positions itself as a leader of Global South, together with China maybe. We could jump into this narrative and say, okay, that's not really nothing on the table. We have something on the table for you, because I think it's not only about the words, it's also about very concrete offer you can give to these countries.
Great point. Again, called agency. And speaking of agency, now it's time for questions from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, please identify yourself, say who you are, and please make sure that what you're saying ends with a question mark. I am told that there are a lot of friends here from Young Bled, so I'm going to give the young voices here the first chance. So please raise your hand if we see. Yes, right over there, gentlemen in the front row. Yeah, I think the mic is coming.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Vuk Velebit. I come from Belgrade, Serbia. And I work on strengthening US-Serbia relations. My question is for Mr. Tobias. I would like more to understand of course, speaking about Western Balkans, how do you see the current relations between, or the current approach between Germany and the United States towards Western Balkans? And what would be the role of Germany if the US withdraws from the region more in the upcoming period? And speaking about that, why did Germany play to some extent against the Open Balkan Initiative, which was backed by the United States?
Okay, how much time do we have?
Now it's too much.
No, honestly, it's always good if the Europeans and you ask the Germans and the Americans are on the same side, on the same page when it comes to the Western Balkans, for sure. We know the importance of the region for security as well as for prosperity in Europe. And I can tell you from a German perspective, we are well aware that if we make an offer, and I believe that offer was absolutely right, to Moldova, to Ukraine, to Georgia, if conditions are fulfilled, we need to keep the Western Balkans in mind on its pathway inside the European Union. Full stop here. Second, we need to take into account when it comes to transatlantic relations that even if we are on the same page, the European toolbox is different because our main tool is EU accession. And I'm very much in favor that we are making progress on EU accession. I'm in favor of reviewing the mechanism, how to at least open negotiation chapters with countries. I've learned, even though I'm not dealing with EU relations in itself, I've learned and I've recognized that over the past 2-3 years, we haven't made progress on chapters with respect to accession negotiations. And I'm personally in favor to have the idea, can we have a mechanism like qualified majority voting or something, at least to open the chapter, to get some dynamic, because we both know that we have some issues to solve between the EU and Serbia, between other countries on the Western Balkans. So let's do this. Let's sit on one table and let's get started. That would be my answer to your question.
Thank you. Another gentleman in the front row.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everybody. 2 questions. One would be, of course, as before the fading of Pax Americana, Bill Clinton famously said it's about economy. There's a meme going on that says that the United States innovates, that China replicates, and that Europe regulates. And as we can see, the US tech platforms and so on are taking huge advantages in Europe. We're trying to regulate that. At the other side, we're seeing Chinese manufacturing and consumer goods taking, as you mentioned, a lot of shelves in European, and we can even saw that with the likes of BYD, Hisense, and Alipay taking more sponsorships in the European football championships in Germany just this summer. So my question, Tobias, would be for you. Shouldn't the Inflation Reduction Act actually be a wake-up call for Europe and not a threat, and what we can do to mitigate this? And my other question would be regarding the keep calm and waiting for the results of the elections. As you remember, Trump didn't happen in a vacuum. He happened in 2016 after the Brexit vote. And if we're looking what's happening in Europe right now as democracies, we saw the results of the European elections, we saw the results of the French elections, and now we saw the weakened results in Germany. So my question would be, isn't just Pax Americana, and Philippe, this is for you, isn't just Pax Americana fading, but isn't liberal representative democracy as we know it since now fading? Thank you.
It was one for Germany and one for France. I guess we'll start where, since you had the floor last, so we'll start with the question for you, Ambassador.
On the first point, regulating, replicating, innovating, replicating, regulating. There is a very, very interesting case, which is a recent adoption by the European Union of the first artificial intelligence regulation, first among the nations, advanced technological nations. I think that this is. I negotiated myself the regulation for the protection of privacy and in Coreper in Brussels. We have to draw the lesson from this. It gives us in Europe more power for the GDPR is an extraordinary instrument for influence, but indeed it is not enough. And we have created the internal market in the 1970s and 1980s, but it is not complete. And we should follow, I speak personally, the Letta report's conclusions. We have, with our internal market, we have an extraordinary instrument, but it doesn't work well, in particular in the field of technology. It is not normal that we are not able to grow more our startups, which are so many across the European Union. So my feeling is that this is not a bad way to describe the things. It is a reality. It is not that we should be against regulation. We should continue to be for regulating. It's part of our DNA, but we should be much, much more efficient on the side of promoting technologies and implementing technologies through our internal market. And on democracy and the elections, frankly, democracy, I loved what the President Danilo Turk said on the last panel. Democracy is not just a general idea. Democracy is in the reality. We are facing, and somebody yesterday in the plenary mentioned the incredible importance of the information, the battle against the manipulation of information. This is what is at stake in our democracies today. And this is something which unites the United States and the European democracies. We must be very, very serious in modernizing our democracies, but from the bottom, not as a general speech.
Thank you. I mean, the other part of the question is directed to you.
Okay, so one comment on democracies, for sure. Disinformation is one of the big issues, but also, you know, as a German, we just had elections on Sunday in two of the states. We as politicians need to act differently, and we need to take into account that societies have changed and that the way how people interact and how they inform themselves, that has changed. And we need to find recipes how to react to that. It's not sufficient just to complain about disinformation. Disinformation is a big part. On the economic issues, 3 quick points. First of all, I don't believe that the Europeans are more stupid or less intelligent, as you might take it, than the Americans or the Chinese. If you look, for instance, on AI, I'm more concerned on the capital side and on the size of companies, how models are, with respect to AI, for instance, how they are able to grow. And in regulation, I would say, okay, the Europeans at least, they regulate something, while others usually hesitate to regulate. Now, if you take AI again, the EU AI Act is something I believe is really smart because we do not regulate the algorithm in itself. We regulate the outcome. I believe that's a smart approach. But in the end, when it comes to IRA and to China, on China, let me emphasize, it's about critical one-sided dependencies when it comes to diversification. It's not about the T-shirt beneath my shirt or something. It's about critical one-sided dependencies we should focus on. And we should focus on market activities that are not fair. And I very much welcome the Europeans are now checking WTO measures against or with respect to a WTO member named China on EVs. I believe that's the right approach to stay within the framework. And I'm a German. I like to play very much by the rules to remind the others which rules they have signed. Last but not least, on the IRA, yes and no. The IRA is something from an American's perspective really, really smart, and I think it helps to boost innovation and also consumption. I'm afraid if the Europeans would just copy that and would copy it in a bad way, we are back to protectionism. We are getting more and more away from free trade. So let's use the time and let's engage with the next American administration, whoever it might be, on, let's say, a smart framework where, for instance, we regulate or we take into account the carbon footprint of a car, but with a we in a way that we are still able to trade. If we just open our own European IRA box, without speaking to the Americans, if it's compatible to the other side, that's a big risk for trade, I believe.
Thank you. I mean, Małgorzata, you raised your
just one short comment concerning this democracy. We are all facing, of course, the consequences of being democratic societies in a state of war. I think we just forget about it because we discuss war in Ukraine and we think about it, that it's the war somewhere else. It's there, and it's physically there. But Russia started a war against the whole West, not only against Ukraine. And this is in information terms. We are at war as far as information space and media and social media. And it started in 2014, and it's very open. Don't forget that Russia, as a state spends more than $350 million every year for disinformation techniques. And what they do is, it's both in the US and in the EU, different countries, they use elections. They start to put problems in our heads because we are free societies. And we cannot respond to this the same way because they are not free societies. Russia or even other stakeholders like China, they don't have a free, open society to discuss the things like we are discussing now. Everybody can hear that, right? So we are in danger, and we should be a little bit more careful as people, not thinking that the war is somewhere else. The war is with us, but in different terms, not with tanks and weapons like that, but in space of information, disinformation especially, and also cyber attacks. Cyber attacks, we are constantly, Poland is one of the countries, the most, I think, attacked right now. And don't forget one more thing. When we have such a war, it's not about Russia, China, or US as far as topics. This war is about our own emotions. We had a research on that, and for example, in the Balkans, they put in the internet, the Russian bots put in the internet topics concerning, emotions between the people. In Poland, they put that against Ukrainians or Lithuanians or Germans. They fit with different narratives in different countries. And this leads towards the situation you described.
Thank you. We still have time for more questions, comments, or whatever, as long as there's a question mark. Yes, over there.
Thank you. My name is Platon Petre Claudiu from National Administration Association Romania. So I have one remark and one question. Why, if we want to stop Putin and want to stop the war in Ukraine, why we do not confiscate their assets in EU and in the free world? It will be a very easy thing to do to stop the war. Cutting his access to finance. We will not talk about disinformation, about financing his networks in the Balkans and everywhere. So why, as European Union and US, do not do this immediately? This is my question. And how to do it? Immediately. I repeat, it's urgent. Thank you.
In the name of urgency, yes, we would like to tackle that question. Jakub, yours was nodding. Maybe Natalie as well. No, okay.
I won't tell you exactly how to do it, but what you're saying, dear Romanian colleague, is music to Polish ears. We are a hawk as it goes. We want to go after frozen assets of Russia wherever possible. We would like to cut them out of the financial system, but at the same time, we are realistic. Russia's economy is not doing so badly given the circumstances. Why? Because Russia is a rich country as natural resources go, and they have accumulated this firepower, this economic firepower for certain years, for the last decade, and now they are spending it like crazy in order to wage war. This leads me to conclusion that what is needed most on our side is self-awareness. We, as the West, put together, we are much more potent economically, militarily, politically than Russia. And if only we could be united in our response to helping Ukraine, this war would be over very soon. So, and I agree with you, this financial instrument is one of the most important tools in our portfolio.
Thank you. Couldn't agree more. Lady way over there in the back, You raised your hand.
My name is Sabina Lange. I have a simple question. I heard a lot about we need to explain and we need to understand the Americans. My question is, are we listening enough? And are we listening enough, or do we have sufficient and good analysis and institutions where we can actually listen to understand those that we try to persuade? Meaning, are our institutions in place, be it the UN or an institution of diplomacy, equipped still today to actually listen and give space to perhaps some other voices? Because only by understanding those others as well, we can perhaps, or I think we can act and persuade them, basically. So, basically, the listening element. Thank you.
Not an easy
to
question,
Natalie, I think, first, and then... well,
okay.
I'd be happy
not
to
an easy question, but you jumped on it.
Well, I think it's an incredibly important question. And let me say to us, and taking this example of the Global South that we've been discussing a little bit about it. Now, you know, we may not like the term Global South. And we may have, as you were saying, very good reasons not to think that it's accurate. Geographically speaking, different interests. But the point is, going to Sabina's question, the Global South likes the Global South, right? and so it's important to listen to what it is that they like about it. And fundamentally, what they like about it is something which is not very nice for us to listen to, which is the fact that they want to change the system. And they want to change the system because they think that the order has been unfair to them. And this is why, again, you know, sort of these uncomfortable things that come from these countries, I think, are important for us to listen to. They want to change the system because it's been unfair to them, and this gives an edge to countries like China and Russia that are not part of the Global South, but that also want to change the system for very different reasons. Now, it's all very uncomfortable, but until and unless we acknowledge it and listen to it, we're not going to come up with the kind of policy recipes that are going to give us an edge vis-à-vis these countries compared to, for example, Russia and China. And again, you know, there are things that these countries are telling us that are very uncomfortable. Of course, there's the question of the colonial baggage. Okay, I mean, you know, there's only so much that can be done about it. But there are things that we've been doing even very recently that have been essentially validating many of the criticisms they have towards us. Think about the vaccine hoarding. Think about the climate finance, which is not coming to the extent that it should. You know, there are a number of things that we're continuing to do. Think about the way in which we reacted in the energy crisis, the gas hoarding. So there are a number of things that we continue to do today that are very much the product of that not listening that Sabine, I think, was referring to.
Thank you. We're pretty much out of time. I guess, you know, to wrap it up, I think, you know, the panel was about, you know, Pax Americana in the United States. It was a great question about, you know, listening to the Americans. And sure, I mean, full disclosure, I'm half American, half Polish. So we can listen to Americans, but I think it's also important, I think, and hopefully the panel will agree with me, that Europe has agency of its own, right? I mean, we have France, Poland, Germany, Italy. These are great countries, and there are many other great countries in Europe. We do not have to, and we shouldn't wait for whatever is going on in the United States. We have plenty of agency or plenty of problems to tackle, and I think Europe can definitely do that. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you to the audience. Please give the panel a big round of applause. I would like to thank the audience as well. Thank you to Peter. I don't think Peter is here, but I would just like to thank him too. Thanks so much.
2. Okay. 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. One, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3, 4. Ladies and gentlemen, can I please ask you to take your seats? We will try to be on schedule today. I know there are a lot of interesting panels that you mingle around from one hall to the other, but due to the respect to our guests and panelists, thank you so much. Can you give us the clock, please? The counter. Thank you. Can Europe act or continue to sleepwalk, or is it already acting or still sleepwalking? Or are we okay after this year's EU elections and what Ms. Ursula von der Leyen said, defending her second mandate in the European Parliament, that the center holds still in Europe? I'm very happy that today we will have a fruitful discussion with people who are really skilled diplomats, people who are executive ministers from the non-EU country, which is, I think, very important perspective for the future of Europe. And that we will talk also with Guillaume Clossa, executive president of Europa Nova, think tank, which is trying to give us, scenarios for our future. I'm very happy to welcome this morning Mr. Amedin Konakovic, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Welcome. Please give him a round of applause. Next to me is Rastislav Hovanec, right? The State Secretary of Foreign and European Affairs Ministry of Slovakia. Welcome. Our host, as I said, almost Igor Mali, the veteran diplomat, even though we are the same age, State Secretary for European Affairs from the Office of the Prime Minister of Slovenia. Welcome. And as I already introduced, Guillaume Clossa, Executive President of Europa Nova. And Guillaume, I want to start with you maybe to map this discussion this morning, because the panel before us talked about Pax Americana, but the first 45 minutes I was here, they talked just about Europe and how Europe will be in relations to what happens in the States in November. So we'll try to talk from our side. So we have the results of elections as we do. Von der Leyen said the center holds, I'm not that sure, seeing what is happening and within the Constitution of European Parliament and within European countries. The latest example is AfD win into German states the other day. And also, we are waiting still for von der Leyen to give us the new portfolios of this new Commission. She said yesterday that she wants to have empowered a commissioner for enlargement. But what do you see in this context, which are like these 5 to 6 to 10 things, just to map them, which are crucial for Europe to be an actor or a sleepwalker? Just press the mic. Thanks.
Share the result.
No, it's good. It's good. It was on, but you just need to speak louder.
Okay.
Ciao.
That's okay? Okay.
Yeah.
So allow me maybe to share the result of a work which has been done with 50 opinion leaders from the member state, from politics. We had Antonio Costa, we have several prime ministers, from science, from tech, from entrepreneurship, from civil society. Because this result, which was the result of a conclave supported by BSF and Slovenia, but also by M+, Croatia, etc., is very interesting. First of all, the understanding is we are in a period of acceleration. Mm-hmm. Acceleration of crisis, acceleration of transformation, of course, climate change,
and we see that the climate change crises are more and more regular, but also scientific and technological acceleration. And in this period, there is a competition between US and China, where the two superpowers want also to speed up. And 1 year ago, President Biden said the main thing of the next 5 years for the US will be acceleration. And the Chinese president said exactly the same thing. So for me, the main challenge for Europe is how to accelerate with its own ambition. And the question, as you said, is what kind of player do we want to be? Do we want to be a player taken between China and the US? Of course, we have special relationship with the US, and we need to preserve this relationship. But we need to be aware that for the US, either we are a vassal, either we are a strategic partner. And being a strategic partner means we are a power. We are a global, sustainable, responsible power. And for me, the first challenge for Europe is that. Can we become a global, sustainable, responsible power? And from that, you have more detailed challenges. One is about geopolitics and the assertion of Europe as a real geopolitical power. It means, are we able to win this war? Because we have the resource and we have the capacity to unite. But we are not playing completely the game. Edi Rama was very clear on that yesterday. So we need to give ourselves the condition to win the war with regard to Russia, and rapidly, because otherwise the cost is increasing. And this means also we need to prepare our defense to be credible with regard to Russia, but also with regard to China. The second challenge for me is science and technology. In America and in China, science and technology is a key driver for next growth. And we are losing ground in Europe. If we are not putting ourselves in a condition to regaining scientific and technological leadership, we will be out of the economic game, and we will be in a period of accelerated economic decline by the end of the next 5 years. And there it will be a big problem for our society. For me, the third challenge is common goods, climate, education, health. If we look at each of our member states, we have not the capacity to produce fairly, efficiently, the level of common goods citizens are expecting. If we work together, if we use the EU as a leverage, we can produce that. And this is very important because this is a condition for citizens to feel comfortable and to look positively with regard to the future. And the last challenge is democracy. Expectations of citizens are different from the past. They are expecting two opposing things: strong leadership on the one side and inclusive leadership on the other side. And at the same time, they need to articulate national and European democracy in order to understand where they are and how they can be influential. So these are four very specific, urgent and critical challenges on which there are a convergence, a consensus within at least European opinion leader at the level of the 27.
So concerning this acceleration, either this way or that way, or both ways, depending on the area you've mentioned, I want to ask Igor Mali concerning the subject of our panel. We discussed it a little bit earlier. We have this construct, we have this selection of MPs from the, unfortunately, still nation political space, because European countries for the European elections still vote from their national preferences. We still don't have common European political space. We have various other common European spaces, but still not the political one. So how do you see concerning these very big challenges that von der Leyen and this new Commission and the Constitution of the Council and the Constitution of the Parliament will manage to do something? Because the first mandate was the crisis mandate. We had COVID, and it was disastrous time for all of us as citizens, but that in a way helped her to kind of homogenize Europe and try to act in the way she acted. But how do you see this for the period to come concerning huge, big, global, common good challenges, what Guillaume said, and our own, personal pettiness in Europe still?
Thank you for the question. Well, the question, the answer is for two panels. But basically, I fully agree what Guillaume said about the future challenges. I would basically put them into two brackets. One is security, and the other is prosperity. And within this, competitiveness and cohesion and so on. I think that the mandate of the next Commission, the next von der Leyen mandate, is going to be even more challenging than the first one. On one hand, because of all the challenges we have ahead, and on the other, because of the outcome of the European elections and the political scenery we have in Europe. So I think it's going to be quite hard for the biggest ideas, the biggest challenges to put through either through European Council or European Parliament. The Grand Coalition in European Parliament has 400 seats out of 750, so it's slightly above one half. And there are a lot of dossiers which are very important for the next mandate, like green transition, like reform and enlargement, like migration as well, which could be challenging, especially in the European Parliament. So the Commission and of course the Council will have to, especially the Commission, will have to balance in the European Parliament on those most topical issues. And besides this coalition I mentioned, you have basically, I would say, two parties in the European Parliament that the Commission or the President von der Leyen could count on specific dossiers. One are the Greens, and the other, as I see it, perhaps the ECR.
Migration.
Exactly. And those in some dossiers are not seeing the same way, those two potential partners. So it's going to be very challenging for the next Commission to work on those dossiers. We have also the relatively new situation also in the European Council, with some member states that had elections in a couple of months ago, and the political scenery totally changed. All of a sudden, we have less liberals in the European Council and more, let's put it this way, ECR and right center or right leaders. And this on this front is going to be challenging, especially on the dossier. I find it of extreme importance for the next at least 2 years, and this is the next budget, the multi-annual financial framework, because the European budget reflects the priorities. If you put the priorities on the paper, you cannot implement them if you don't have the budget behind. And then the battle for the next budget, European budget, is going to be very, very challenging and very important. And at the end of the day, this battle goes to the European Council. So it's going to be a real challenge.
Yeah, and then we come to leadership, and then I'll talk to Minister Konakovic, because we heard from Ursula von der Leyen yesterday in her speech here in Bled that she wants to have substantial commissioner for enlargement, because the whole politics of enlargement with the war in Ukraine and the new geopolitical situation basically changed in a lot of ways. Concerning the previous commissioner, and there also was a commissioner for enlargement in the previous commission. It's not something new now. What do you think will be important from the stance of that policy concerning this pivotal moment we are in? But also I would like to hear from you, because you waited for so long to cross the Rubicon in Bosnia and Herzegovina in terms of relation and negotiations with the EU. What would be your 5 cents to von der Leyen if you were sitting in the ministerial council talking to her? You know, what should she do?
Yeah. Thank you so much. European enlargement policy has changed completely after Russian aggression in Ukraine. So Europeans, I'm talking about Bosnia and Herzegovina, they woke up and they realized, beside this administrative issues, we have some really important security issues now at the moment. Let me start with the story I heard from previous president of Slovenia, Mr. Borut Pahor. We were panelists in Mostar in July, maybe 1 month and a half ago. And he told us a story when he met Vladimir Putin 10, 15 years ago. And he asked him about Western Balkans. He asked him, okay, what is actually Russian interest in Western Balkans territories? So he said, you are losing that game. You have already Albania, North Macedonia, Montenegro, they are NATO members. So you have all countries applying for full membership in EU. So what are you doing in Western Balkans? And Putin said, yes, that's true. They are NATO members and they are applying for EU, and we made a mistake. And he said, we will never do the same mistake. So he sent a message that he's going to fight for the influence or for the control of this part of the world. And that is the first thing that Europeans have to be aware today. Because of this security issue that we all have together, this is really challenging. That because of malign Russia influence, you can see, I will explain how in my country and some other countries, this is the main message. We have a common enemy, and he is actually really active. My colleague, also previous Minister of Foreign Affairs, explained once, Mr. Bujarosmani, he explained how Russia actually is collecting frustrations on Western Balkan space because, I don't know, Thessaloniki summit happened 20 plus years ago, and since then only Croatia actually became a full member of EU, and nothing is happening for 2 decades. In my country, like I said before, EU was sleeping for 10 years, doing nothing, and of course we are aware of our mistakes. Of course, our politics is really... Okay, I will not talk about our politics. We have campaign. We have campaign now. I don't want to use this space. So that is to explain how important geopolitically and security issue is now in this space for European Union. And it was really brave and brave decision in March this year to officially open negotiations with Bosnia and Herzegovina. That was the right message to Moscow. And I think they were surprised. They were shocked. Because, to be honest, we still need to deliver a lot of things. We had a good start. We delivered 7 European laws. We have 16 laws adopted. And you have to know complexity of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Dayton's agreement brought a peace, but also brought complexive constitution where you need consensus about every single important issue in Bosnia and Herzegovina. You cannot adopt simple law without actually consensus from 3 sides. You need to have them all voting, supporting on Council of Ministers, House of Representatives, House of People. So that shows how complex Bosnian constitution is. And at the end, President of Republika Srpska, Milorad Dodik, he visited Russia this year 2 times, in January and June. 6th of June this year, he sent the message to Europeans, to EU, to Americans, to United Kingdom that they are on the wrong side of the civilization. Then he criticized, together with Putin, all of them. And now, can you imagine him voting for this EU agenda inside of our parliaments with the veto right in his hands, and EU expecting us to deliver of course, we need to deliver. I know it is merit-based, but it's not merit-based only. This is now, we need leaders, we need leadership, we need brave leaders to see what is really happening in this small part of the world, but on the other side, so interesting to these, let's say, big players. I don't know why, but obviously we are. So I have some numbers. I'll probably use these numbers later to explain how important the EU is for my country. Let me start just with the export. Bosnia and Herzegovina export goes 92% to European Union, 70% directly to member states, and 22% to the region. And all regional countries are candidate countries. We export to Russia and China yearly less than 1% of our products. So can you imagine economical influence, but also on the other side, political, geopolitical, strategical influence from Russia? And for the future of my country, EU integration is must. This is top priority number one. But also on the other side, we need EU to understand this is not merit-based story only. Of course, we don't ask for shortcuts, but we ask for understanding what is really happening right now in my country.
Talking about, you've mentioned economy, and Guillaume mentioned how this acceleration can go in negative side because of our position in current global economical situation. I also remember this forgotten Zagreb declaration from this summit in 2020 during COVID time, where it was emphasized on paper that all the Western Balkans countries, the biggest investor in them is EU overall. So that is something everyone, when is trying to sow this information, need to remember. State Secretary Chovanec, I want to ask you, because your background is competitiveness, is economy, to start from that, and then we go to these big issues, and climate and migration and democracy, which is, I think, of fundamental geopolitical value, and of course defense as a new portfolio that is coming to us in the next commission. What are the main risks? We heard this morning on the panel on the United States how IRA was shocking for Europe. But where we are now with economy, with our plan of, Green Deal from one side and, making partnership around Europe and within Europe that are democratically maybe problematic. We'll jump into that also later.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. My point is that, unfortunately, European Union is losing its competitiveness comparing to the main partners like US and China. And it was also said today at the beginning that US and China are talking about acceleration. And my question will be, where is EU? We used to be there competing with these two superpowers, and somehow our competitive advantage is being smaller. That's one of the issues. I have an economic background. As you said, I used to be a state secretary at the Ministry of Economy. So I look at the decisions and at the strategies through money or through the impact on businesses. It might not be always the best case, but that's what I do, and maybe it would be good to balance some of the priorities of EU, comparing and taking into consideration the impact it has on the businesses and on the companies, because we lost our competitive advantage in different sectors, and I do not see any specific sector where we would still be world leaders. We are slowly losing our competitiveness in automotive industry, which was always a priority for us. We are not the front leaders in the new technologies like AI, because there is a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of administrative measures that the companies have to fulfill, and that's why they are leaving. And the crisis showed us really, really well how vulnerable we are. We act as a European Union, as a one group of countries, but if there is a crisis like we had during the COVID, then all of a sudden Schengen rules don't apply because a respective country decides it doesn't. And what I think what we should focus on is to come back to the basics, because the European Union started as an economic project, and realize what we should do to be more competitive, and from that point on to try to focus on getting back to the leadership that we as a European Union had before.
Am I right if I will say, Guillaume, that two things holding us back in these times? Ask me if I don't explain it right, are values and regulation. And war, of course, which we will talk about a lot in next minutes. But how can we jump out of this because we have acceleration, because we really don't have time. If you see what's going on in terms of deterioration of economy, we heard Minister Konakovic today and Prime Minister Rama yesterday, and we saw what from one side Elon Musk is doing every day and TikTok is doing to our kids. How can we preserve whatever this European democracy and values is in this kind of acceleration, which is mind-boggling to the everyday effects we have on our lives and economy, because it is, I think, connected.
Several things. First of all, the resilience of the EU and its member states is quite remarkable. I mean, we have a series of crises. We have 20 crises the last 20 years, and more or less we did well. But we were reactive each time, and that's an issue. I can give you an example. 14 years ago, I was Sherpa of the reflection group on the future of Europe. We had identified the risk of a pandemic. But as it was not a European competence, we put it out of the report. We had identified a risk of a war with Russia 15 years ago. But as it was not a European competence, we put it out. We had identified the risk of industrial decline with the beginning of tech transnational giant. But as it was not a European competence, we put it out. And each time we see a problem which is not a European competence, we put it out, we position ourselves into a reactive mode. And we say, but you see, Europe is not working. But I mean, we have all the elements to be proactive. But at a certain moment, we need to understand that we need to identify the problem, and whatever the competence of the EU, we need to find a European solution. Otherwise, we are dead. Up to June, we were the first global economy. Now China is in front of us in terms of size. We have a market. We are supposed to have a single market. But this single market does not exist in health. Health is our main competitive advantage. Is our main competitive advantage where artificial intelligence is key. But member states don't want a single market for health. Okay. We don't have a single market for digital service. That should be our first, but member state don't want. So you see there is a series of contradictions we need to solve very quickly. And on the other side, the last 10 years, both China and the US have developed long-term strategy to retake scientific and industrial leadership. And in the US, it started 12 years ago with Obama, who developed an advanced manufacturing strategy. I mean, the Ministry of Defense and the Department of Defense, they are investing hundreds of billions of dollars in order to support their industry with nothing to declare to WTO. So how do you want to be competitive when your main economic partner is developing non-competitive strategy for the long term? And China, they are doing exactly the same thing. So at a certain moment, we should wonder ourselves on what do we want? Do we want to exist in this world? Do we want to be an industrial and an economic power in the interest of our company and our citizens? Or do we want to be taken between China and the US and to compete only on the cost dimension? But if we compete only on the cost dimension, we are killed. We need to be able to innovate. And for that, we need to invest much more in research and development. And for that, we need an investment in defense. Because the competitive edge of the US and China, even regarding the investment in Google, etc., but they use the defense money for that to support a certain number of initiatives. We don't do it. We don't do it. We are too much fragmented. So, I mean, we have now a clear understanding of the situation. The question now is, do we want to act or not? And if we want to act, we need to be bold. We are not create competitiveness again only by working on social fair. We need to work on science and technology, because science and technology drive competition nowadays. But no, we need to be clear on that. Science and technology. And we are about to be nowhere. Regarding GAFA and the equivalent Chinese, Russia, India, Emirates, the US, of course, China, they have a strategy of digital public and private infrastructure, continent-wide. We don't have. And we know that this infrastructure are the condition for competitiveness for the next 5 years, the next decade. We could have, in sectors, I mean, health, for example, defense, telecoms, information. And this can be organized. But where is the political willingness? And where is the political understanding? The issue we have is, in China, we have engineers. In the US, you have engineers who are influencing the government and the parties. In Europe, where are the engineers who are influencing the political leader? No, but that's the question. That's the question. And if we do not answer this question, and if we do not integrate in our European DNA these engineering skills, we are dead. You know that the development of Europe was linked to our capacity to innovate in science and technology, and our leadership was there, and our competitiveness. And now, it's not a political issue. It should be the top political issue. In China, it is a top political issue. In the US, it is a top political issue. When do we discuss that in Europe? We speak about artificial intelligence, but without tech giant, we can't leverage the capacity of artificial intelligence, because we need a lot of data, and we need not only national data, we need transnational data in order to nurture the algorithm and to provide added value.
Yeah, but it was a long discussion in Europe and very hard to formulate, and concerning the fact that we are faced with brutal, raw military force from the East and, you know, very, very serious security issues now, which also include our green transition, in a sense, you know, search for whatever you need for them.
But we have the skills, we have the technical skills. The fact is, there is a race for the skills.
Yeah, but we don't have time to go so deep into that. I want to ask Igor Mali to reflect on that and to add this dimension of security concerning both the dimension of defense and security in terms of our economy in the framework of green transition, digital transformation also, because we need resources for that. And of course, in that regard, how do we preserve what Europe was the bastion of, democracy and values? We heard on the previous panel that Poland will put values up front of their presidency. So what are these values if you go around the world, shake hands with people who are dubious concerning democratic values?
It's a very complex question.
Yeah, okay.
But still, let me reflect.
We'll leave it to the audience to ask more a little bit later.
Let me reflect to what Guillaume said. I think there is understanding among member states and leaders what is necessary. There is no willingness. Yeah. Why? Because at the end of the day, it's a matter of priorities and it's a matter of money. So that's why I've emphasized the question of EU budget and negotiations. Because the same answer to the USA, their IRA, definitely invest more in industry, in innovation, science, technology. And from this perspective, I very much like the idea put forward of President von der Leyen on the European Competitiveness Fund. I think it's a very good idea. We've tried to tackle IRA with the EU budget reshuffle, so the MFF review, which was done a couple of months ago. The USA put 200 or 300 billion in IRA. We were discussing about 10 million. Come on. Or a bit more, but still, the proportions are huge. So there are two answers to this, how to push things forward. One is the EU budget, and the other is Capital Markets Union. We still lack capital, the private capital investing in Europe. A lot of European private capital invest in the States. So we have to reverse this flow and make the situation that European capital, private capital, invest in European projects of the future. This is one. Secondly, I'm coming back to the EU budget. I've done the negotiations, I think, 3 times now. Every single time at the beginning, everybody's very much in favor to invest more in competitiveness, in research, in the forward-looking fields. At the end, this is either lesser budget, net payers. They want to have lesser budget for all the challenges we have. The second group, cohesion, and the third group, agriculture. So there is hardly any defendant of forward-looking policies besides the Commission. And that's the problem. The answer to this problem, as I see it, is that the EU budget should have new own resources. So it would not be, so basically it means European taxes. It won't be so linked to the willingness of different member states. It's a long shot, but still. I'm sure that the debate on the new own resources will surface also on the next negotiations. But still, we'll see how far will we go. There are going to be in the next 5 years, and also in those budget negotiations, additional new challenges we haven't faced before, and this is primarily defense. Here, I think that a vast majority of member states will be very much in favor of putting more money in defense. Including some of the net so-called frugals, net payers, especially from the north, which is positive. But I think the defense sector will sooner or later have to be financed also with loans, one way or another. Not directly from the EU budget, but mainly from loans.
But recovery and resilience of the future.
Yeah.
Next generation.
Basically,
until we finally figure out, that we need to change some things if we want to survive. If we're not dead when that happens.
I would be very much in favor of a new next generation EU for the next period. To prolong it or to make it a new one, but that's not the reality we are facing. There are some member states which don't like this approach. But I think that at least part of it, of the logic of the next generation EU, will go on, either in some policies, and there is already a discussion on this, or to finance areas like the security. So we'll see how far we'll go on this.
But in this triangle of defense, security, and values, Minister Konakovic, you've mentioned it earlier, it's of utmost importance and for the region and for Europe to kind of accelerate the process of enlargement. But I want to ask you also to put in the main disputable questions of European political spectrum, which are migration and climate change. Because in Bosnia and Herzegovina, you also have some residues from the past concerning, we heard President Perc yesterday talking about how important it is to have clean water, air, all these, common humanity things that Europe needs to preserve. And with all these huge challenges, do you see Macron's agenda on enlargement and the concept of EPC being out there as some kind of, I will call it waiting room, maybe there's a completely wrong name for it. But do you think we need to have really enlargement back in town as such, as European core policy?
Zenica city in Bosnia and Herzegovina was the warmest city in Europe 7 days ago, 42 degrees. Now, climate changes are really, really important because of environment, because of our lives, of course. But on the other side, economy is something that, for us in Bosnia and Herzegovina, is top priority number one. You said the regulation and values. I completely agree. I will tell you something about regulation. Drivers from Western Balkans countries, all 6 countries together, all of us together, we are spending yearly, in period of 12 months, we are spending on the European Schengen border more than 3,000 years, 3 millenniums, waiting for the administration documents, stamps, approvals, phytosanitary inspections, all other controls. Can you imagine how that affects our economy also? Everything is, of course, connected with the enlargement and on what actually that means to our countries. On the other side, we understand the complexity of EU also. 27 states, 27 decision makers with the veto rights. I can imagine how EU will look with 6 of us together inside with Bosnia-Serbia relations, Kosovo-Serbia relations, veto rights. So we understand the fears from EU side also, but let's go back to economy. My country, we have 21% of population older than 65 years. We have the lowest fertility rate in Europe, only 1.3. And we have huge brain drain issue. People are leaving. People are actually already here in Slovenia, in Croatia, in Germany, and
you
Austria.
Have these engineers to provide for the future of Europe.
So you have our knowledge here already working on it to be competitive with the China and the United States. And I told you already, 92% of our export goes to EU. It's almost the same with the investments. So we cannot find any other substitution for European market. That's the destiny, our destiny. And with if we remove only this barrier, actually, administrative on the borders, and if we can have our phytosanitary inspectors doing their job, we're going to have an impact of 1.5% on our GDPs, all of our countries. So can you imagine how big opportunity for us is this story about the enlargement? But also, let me underline one more time, this is important for Europe, also not only because of security, but because of bigger market and some other opportunities, of course, that we can bring with us together inside as a values inside of European Union. Our pension fund is going to explode in only 8 years. We need more than 3% yearly growth of our GDP to protect our economy. And we can have only one solution. This is integration of our market into big European single market, removal of these administrative barriers, more investors. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, bigger salaries. And that's actually what is the plan of politicians in Bosnia and Herzegovina, those who are serious, those who are not populists, actually, because we cannot, and it's not only President of Republika Srpska, the only problem in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have now a new trend, actually, because Russia is collecting frustrations, and now we have politicians on Bosniak side advocating for BRICS membership. There is a guy, young guy, the member of presidency of the strongest party in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He went out a few months ago and he said, okay, why not Russia and China today? We need to try to find some other friends. This is, let me be honest, stupid. But you know what is public opinion and how can public opinion be created? Okay, if we have frustration on one side, European thinking about, I don't know, this is process like 20 plus years old and long, and we are waiting for Europeans to do something for us. We have populists on the scene talking about, I don't know, there are some Muslim countries, friendly countries, you know, they can help. us economically, that's impossible. Their economical activities with Russia, nothing, zero. But they're actually waiting, they are collecting frustration, they have individuals, politicians, they have influence on them directly, and they are creating public opinion. Listen, guys, Europeans, they don't want you, so think about some other solutions. And if politicians actually if they start to formally to propose and to seek other solutions, we are in trouble, all of us together.
And I have to come to the, again, question of democracy and values in this world, because I think, if that is not the part of the conversation in Europe, then there's no Europe anymore. You were detected as a country with biggest malign disinformation influence, Slovakia. You had, this path from the murder of the journalist Jan Kuciak to the assassination attempt to the Prime Minister Fico. So all the political spectrum was covered. Risk that is for Europe concerning the policies that are out there and disinformation campaigns that are actively working on dismantling European democracy. On the case of your country, of course.
Yeah. I don't want to connect these two tragic events, because I don't think they show any trend. There were two very unfortunate events done by, let's say, individuals. I don't think that it's a matter of pattern or something that we should fear about in the future. We are not that type of country. Of course, the misinformation and this fake news and all these new, I would call them lies, that are coming with the spread of social media. That's my take, that since we have all the social media basically running the news all around the countries, and that the politicians are using it, we get a lot of more misinformation and a lot of more basically lies to the public, and then it creates two very divided groups of people. Right now, I personally feel that we are losing this political left or right, or the dividing system for political parties. It's I'm pro something and against anything. And now the differences are basically clearing out. And that creates a lot of anger, which can result in some of very unfortunate events. I don't have the solution for that, but we maybe need to go one step back and try to come up with the way how let this misinformation influence our lives less. We need maybe to, the freedom of speech might need some borders, might need some limits, just to let the population just to calm down, because I really believe, and it's all around the Western world.
It's just an issue how they define freedom of speech is fine, but hate speech and spreading, violence, and that's something different.
Exactly, but right now I don't see the border. Yeah, but I don't see the border between those two, because a lot of hate speech is being covered by the freedom of speech, because the social media are enabling it. So maybe we need to realize what is good for, what information have to be said, because people have right to hear both sides or all different opinions, but we should not be discussing about something which are absolutely lies, like the flat earth and something like that. And I believe that would really calm down the situation in public space, and then we can concentrate on the real problems. Because right now, a lot of politicians are fighting artificial problems. They are just coming up with the topics where they can hate each other or show that they are against something, but we are not tackling the real issues that our economy needs. And it's on the top level all the way up to the local politicians.
Before I do two wrap-up rounds, I will just ask one of the young BSFs to prepare. I'll give you the question first, and then we'll continue with Q&As. I don't know who's responsible for the mic. Just solve it with them. Just keep the mic first, so no one takes it from you. So when we wrap up, I need to have two fast rounds, because there is so many things, and of course we cannot solve the issues. We can just detect them and point out to things that are really important. I'm glad that we did competitiveness and economy also, because it lacks, and everyone else talked about defense and war in Ukraine, so maybe we skipped it a little bit on this panel. I had a list of questions that we formulated with BSF that I will read, and it says like this. Can the EU reassume its role as a united geopolitical power on the world stage, or will it become a fragmented entity struggling to define its role and identity? How might the division of power in the new European Parliament and new leadership, what we talked about, influence direction of the European Union? In what ways could they influence the EU's relationship with key global partners? What potential shifts may occur in diplomatic and trade engagements? And how can Europe regain and truly harness its soft power based on democracy and shared values? We heard from Natalie Tocci in the previous panel that Pax Americana is over. So is the idea of Europe formulated in this united geopolitical power, soft power based on democracy and shared values, also something that is over or disappearing, or it can be what the French band Daft Punk says, like a legend of the phoenix, it will rise up again somewhere over the rainbow, which is also under threat in Europe, the rainbow.
Well, if we listen to people saying that Europe should have disappeared 25 years ago and many times in between, the European project is sustainable because the European citizens want it. I don't know why they want it, but if we look at the Eurobarometer, at least the last 7 years, the level of commitment is very high. And for me, very often, political leader and national leader become more pro-European or less Eurosceptic because there is this support of people. The real question is how to make this support more cohesive for the long term. Europe needs to be go on being a success, but this is also a matter of mindset, of value, of narrative. And the citizen needs to be part in the reviving of the European narrative, because the generation of past war is dead or dying, and the new generation has not. So this is one thing. But the second thing is, which is very important.
Just one thing, because we.
Igor, but one thing. Igor said on purpose, we know what to do, and the topic is the money behind. But in between, you have something which is we need to assess exactly how much money we need in order to do what we have to do. And we have not made this assessment. And within that, we need to integrate the condition of success of enlargement. This is very, very important. We need to assess exactly the money we need. And once we have done this assessment, it will be much easier to find the money.
And do we need a new town or city in Europe to have another treaty, not Lisbon anymore, something else?
Well, it's not a question of treaty.
No, I'm asking Igor. Sorry, we have a wrap-up.
The question is another treaty. So treaty change.
Ljubljana treaty.
The town is not important. The substance is. I think there is a need for one, but in reality, I can hardly imagine that today or tomorrow it could be implemented. Because whatever we agree upon, it will end up at national referendum, and there is a challenge. So first, we have to find a way how to find the key priorities and how to implement them. But on the other hand, we have to, before doing this exercise, also explain the narrative to the citizens, as Guillaume said. So first this, and then possible treaty change. Otherwise, we will just raise the expectations, and where we might fail.
Mr. Hovanec, your last point for the end.
I believe that if EU wants to stay competitive, and I hope it does, we need to make the business environment much more easier and flexible, less bureaucratic for the companies. We need to refocus how to keep the biggest companies in Europe, how to put more money into this R&D and innovation activities so we stay competitive. We need to finish the single market, even I would say at whatever price it takes, because we need to keep the best companies and the most prosperous companies in European Union. We should concentrate on closing more trade agreements. EU didn't close any trade agreement, the meaningful trade agreement in 6, 7, 8 years. That's what we should focus. And I really believe that all the new strategies that would be taken into consideration should have this business impact assessment to know exactly what will happen to our companies when the proposition would be put into practice. Because in some areas, like the getting out from nuclear energy, and now we are getting back with some of the Green Deal issues where our steel mills had to be closed down, and now we are importing the steel from China. Those were mistakes, so we have to admit it and not to make them again.
And these big geopolitical powers are still ruled by very old men. I'm happy that on the panel we have Gen Xers, and in the audience we have Gen Z, but I want to finish with Minister Konakovic. The most famous from our Gen X remembrance in former country called Yugoslavia, the most famous sleepwalker was a boy called Malik from a movie Father on the Business Trip that won the Cannes Film Festival Best Movie Award in 1985. And there was this rude sentence kids were mocking him, saying to him, so what can we do that the countries of the region of Western Balkans become the countries from which ideas for new Europe will come, from our sleepwalking for years?
Malik is now famous chief in one of the
famous chief in Rijeka. We have mayor of Rijeka here.
Great,
we
great.
can go and
so
have
try his
this
kitchen.
week.
They said
yeah.
it's really great. So,
chef.
Obviously,
pastry
chef. Obviously, it's not enough for the European Union to be only economically united anymore, because you have the new world order, like geopolitically, strategically, especially in the sense of security. We need to see a leaders inside of European Union to break some walls. Our experience can be good. I was a soldier during the war. I was 17 and a half, but I was defending my country because we were attacked. And today I'm sitting and negotiating with the people I was fighting against 30 years ago. We were on different sides, shooting each other, not politically, like we were in the war. But today, because of all these facts, because of the future of my country, that's the only way. We need consensus, and I need to talk, to sit, to talk with them. We don't agree about almost anything from our history, but because of the future, we need to break some walls. We need to be brave and actually to make some serious decisions, because we want our country in European Union developed strong enough to keep young people to stay in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We expect to see something like that from the European leaders also. You know, not only bureaucracy, Brussels' famous bureaucracy, but leadership, also some brave decisions, not because of us. I will explain Western Balkans' position, but we are talking now about a big geopolitical world fight, and in the sense of economy and some other issues. For us, it's crucial, but also geographically, it's important for European Union to have Western Balkans integrated. We are talking about 20 and something million people, not too much. It's not like, you know, numbers are not big. Our economy cannot disrupt or affect European economy. We don't have any big agricultural issues like Ukraine has. So this is big, important issue for agriculture in European Union. And that is actually the advantage of this story, because we need each other right now. But also on the other side, we need leadership. Like, we hope that this EU story will continue. The last 2 years, unfortunately, because of aggression in Ukraine, they were in the right direction, let's say. This enlargement, new politics has changed, and it is a chance for all of us. And we are expecting to see actually the new members of all commissions and their approach regarding the future. I hope it will be common future, not Yeah, thank you.
And we'll have a commissioner for the future. Young BSF, the floor is yours. First question, where are you? Please.
Here. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Jana Burzikova. I'm from the Czech Republic, and as has been said, I'm part of the Young BSF. My question goes to the fact that we often hear the critique of the EU being over-regulated. For instance, the recent EU AI Act that has just recently came into force. And you have mentioned several times today the importance of private investments, the importance of technology, AI, science, etc. And my question goes to if you believe that maybe this tendency of the EU to regulate that much can pose such a burden or obstacle towards the strive to become a leader again and to attract the businesses, to keep the companies in Europe. Thank you.
Who wants to pick that question up? Okay, one. We have a second one there. Please, the mic.
Hello, my name is Milena Mihajlović, European Policy Center, Belgrade. We see recently, in the recent period,
you want just ask. I'm asking for the
that there is an increasing tension between the EU's focus on values on the one hand and its necessity to focus also on the geopolitical priorities on the other hand. This can very tangibly be seen in the case of Serbia, which as a candidate country has a government which is increasingly at odds with the EU values, especially democracy and rule of law. There has been and still is a period of democratic backsliding in the country, while at the same time the EU is very pushy and very decided and committed to exploring and getting the lithium that it badly needs for the green transition. The population of Serbia increasingly feels that the EU is simply decided to pursue its geopolitical interests, the nearshoring and getting the lithium that it needs, regardless of what happens in terms of domestic politics, the breach of human rights, freedom of speech, etc. in the country. How do you see this tension being resolved in the future, if at all? And can the citizens of Serbia, for example, still hope that Serbia can become an EU member despite the fact that the democratic and rule of law backsliding is being neglected and sidelined by the EU due to the geopolitical interests?
Thank you so much. Who will take this one? Who will take this one, just to know? Who will take this one, just to know? Okay, and we have the third one.
Don't push me. I will be blamed from
the lady in
President
the
of
back.
Serbia
Okay,
for something, probably.
we need some sound bites for the media. The last one is there, and we're going to answer this 3-1, and then we'll see if there's enough time to continue. Thanks.
My name is Sabina Lange. This year, 2 former Italian prime ministers were charged with important reports, Enrico Letta on the future of single market, and during a few days, Mario Draghi on competitiveness. My question to Guillaume, because you addressed the question of something not being within the EU competence and that being a particular issue, and to the 2 state secretaries, where do you see the potential for the EU to overcome the divisions, some of them listed by Mr. Mali earlier, between the member states to embark on what is absolutely necessary? And you've been addressing this now for an hour. So where is this sliver of hope, as discussed yesterday, the opening? Where can we find this negotiating path to overcome those divisions between netto payers, netto receivers, frugals, cohesion receivers, and so on? Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll go. So AI, Mr. Mali, first question from Young BSF.
Excellent question, if I may add. The administrative burden is one of the biggest obstacles of the EU. And how this does it show? It shows in competitiveness. It shows in, at the end of the days, in farmers, rallying on the streets. So this topic of cutting red tape is going to be one of hidden but very important challenges that the next Commissioner will have. How to cut red tape on different levels, from agriculture, green transition, to I don't know, industry competitiveness and so on. It's already ongoing, but I think it will have to, the Commission will have to do more, and all the member states will have to do more. So yeah, definitely agree that this is one of the very important obstacles we have, and we have to tackle it on all levels, not only on one segment.
So who will tackle, because I was trying to walk around this question again with the shaking hands with people who have lithiums or whatever, but no one picked up on it, so thank you for the precise definition of this question. So who wants to take the Serbia question first time? Okay, then I will name you, but...
Sure, okay. No, I will not mention Serbia. I was some complications. We also have a narrative, from those politicians who are not so pro-European. Okay, EU is coming. Okay, they will take everything we have. They will take our water. They will take our, they will actually forbid our conservative, traditional, rules, and we don't have anything from them. So that's not true. We have to fight for our values, all of us. Bosnia and Herzegovina will fight. I will fight for my people, for our values. I'm conservative. So I think we can protect our identities. We can also protect our environment. We can protect our countries, but also we can be a part of European Union. They are fighting for their values, all of them, 27 member states. They have the same issues. And that's internal question. That's a question for your president, for his leadership. Is he planning actually to develop economy with selling lithium and affecting environment or not? And there is a democracy. I can see people there fighting for the environment, and that's okay. We will do the same. We will protect our countries, but also opportunities are huge. And I don't see any other options for our countries. That cannot be BRICS. That cannot be any other partnership. We cannot export to, I don't know, far away other continents. That's not possible. For our kids and the future of our countries, the EU is really important. But also, I agree completely, we need to protect our identities and values.
And Guillaume, about Letta and Draghi report, and maybe you can pick up also on that.
Well, I think now we are expecting for the Draghi report, which should go beyond the Letta report. But there is one thing, our main competitive advantage economically is the single market, and this single market needs to be a reality. Now we need two things. On the one side, we need the Commission, when we will have the Draghi report, to make a proposal, because they have the initiative. And on the other side, there will be a negotiation with the member state, but in a new context, because we will have a new leadership, and Antonio Costa will be the president of the European Council. And I think Costa has a diplomatic capacity which might be higher than the one we have today, which could help to find a solution. And the fact that we have a clear view on how China on the one side and how the US are advancing, we need to have a clear understanding of what's happening in both China and the US will help a lot to go ahead in this perspective. We need benchmark, because this benchmark will push member states to take the right decision. And we need also to act via regulation and not directive, because each time now we have directive, the member states are creating additional administrative burden. And so that's funny, because they recreate barrier. And this is not possible, because the EU is to reduce the barrier.
Thank you, Mr. Horns.
Thank you. I have a very similar opinion. Without the single market, the EU is not what it meant to be. It's one of the main features that we just achieve this result. We have to arrive to this result. We need two things. I also believe that the new commission, a new commissioner will try to do all the negotiation with the member states so we can get as close to the single market as possible, but also the political leaders from respective countries, maybe ministers of economy, have to quit using this EU agenda for the local or national political fight. We need just to say for a better good to approve the single market. Maybe sometimes you have to fall down so you can rise again, and I'm afraid the EU is falling, and we need to find a bottom and just come up. Having the full single market is the first step in the right direction.
And hope we will not receive any nuclear bombs in the meantime. Rastislav Hovanec, thank you. Guillaume Klosa, thank you so much. Igor Mali, the host here from Slovenia, thank you. And Minister Konakovic, thank you so much for being our guest.